The first thing I felt was the sun trying to kill me, not shine on me, kill me. It was sitting directly on my face like it had a grudge, and every breath I took came with a wet, tearing feeling somewhere under my ribs that I really did not want to investigate. My right hand was locked around something, a knife, a short knife. So blunt and bent that calling it a weapon felt like an insult to weapons. And about 10 steps away, 2 people were talking about me like I was already furniture. He's not dead. He's just injured and unconscious. Do you have any healing spells or potions? I don't have those things. Great. Fantastic. Love that for me. I couldn't open my eyes yet. I could hear though, and what I heard was a man in a cowboy hat flicking open a revolver and complaining that the wolf had been surprisingly tough. A level 2 monster. Level 2. The thing that had just opened me up like a bag of chips was the second lowest rung on the ladder. I had been the guy standing in front of it while these 2 shot it in the back. Then came the sound that changed my life. A soft click like a jewelry box opening. Huh? Why is this box empty? That is unlikely. It's completely empty. There's nothing in here. I want you to understand what was happening there. In this world, when you clear a dungeon, a treasure chest appears. Everyone gets one. It's the whole reason people risk their lives. You bleed, you win, you open the box, you get paid. And a chest coming up empty is rarer than pulling a rare item. Statistically, I had just been struck by lightning in the worst possible direction. Oh, he's really pitiful. He almost lost his life fighting that monster, and all he got was an empty treasure chest. There's nothing we can do. Sometimes luck just plays tricks on us. Let's go. We'll team up again next time if we have the chance. Okay, goodbye. And they left. 2 sighs and a goodbye. That was my funeral. For about 15 minutes, I lay there on that yellow wasteland with a hole in my chest and an open, empty box beside my head, cooking gently in the sun. Then my eyes snapped open, and the first coherent thought in my brand new skull was, ouch, did I transmigrate? And what kind of player did I become? Yeah, about that. Back home, I was an office worker. My last memory of my old life is fluorescent lights and overtime, which tells you everything about how I died. Then somebody somewhere decided the funniest possible thing to do with my soul was to drop it into a body belonging to a guy with my exact name, who had just been chewed on by a giant wolf, and whose entire earthly reward for that experience was an empty wooden box. His memories came with the body, which is a mixed blessing. On one hand, I instantly knew where I was and what a player was. On the other hand, I instantly knew that this idiot had spent every single wan he owned to buy the cheapest class card on the market. Saber, melee, sword guy, in a world where monsters get shot to death from a safe distance by people with guns. The forums had a nickname for the saber class. It was cannon fodder, not as an insult, as a job description. So there I was, dying on a wasteland, broke, in a body I hadn't earned, holding a knife with the cutting power of a butter spreader, and then a screen appeared in front of my face. Please select your dungeon rewards, up to 3 items. I stared at it. Normal grade, 98% drop rate, a long list of swords, pistols, daggers, wolfskin armor, ammo boxes, cheap rings. Fine grade, 1%, the same stuff, better. And then, at the very bottom, in a category all by itself, rare grade, 0.01% chance of dropping. Wolfslayer blade, I read it 3 times. Then I read it again with my eyes closed, in case I was hallucinating from blood loss, which honestly was a real possibility. Because here's the thing, nobody in this world chooses. That's the entire foundation of the whole system. You kill the thing, the box appears, and the box gives you whatever the universe felt like giving you that day. It's a slot machine you have to bleed to pull. The 2 people who just walked away from me had opened their boxes and gotten standard bullets and a lucky ring, and that was the deal, and everyone accepts it because there is no alternative. I had a menu. I can choose my dungeon rewards. Is something wrong with this? Now, in a better written story, this is where I would have sat down and carefully considered the philosophical implications. In reality, I was leaking. The sun was still trying to murder me. I was about 4 minutes from passing out again, so my entire strategic thought process was, rarest thing, take it now. The highest tier reward among these is the rare Wolfslayer blade, which is perfect for me, so I'll choose this one. Only 1 allowed. Fine. Armor then, and 1 more thing off the good shelf. Done. Confirm. 3 items appeared in the empty box next to my head, out of thin air, into the container that a man in a cowboy hat had personally verified was empty about 20 minutes earlier. Then came the hard part, which was crawling. I have fought some difficult battles since that day, and I want to be clear that dragging a shredded torso across 4 feet of dirt to touch a wooden box remains in the top 5. I got my fingers on each item, willed them into my personal space. Every player has one. Mine was about a cubic meter, which is the storage equivalent of a gym locker. And then I told my panel to send me home. Before I fainted, I woke up on a single bed under a gray-white ceiling with a small spider taking a leisurely walk into a crack. My body was perfect. Not healed. Perfect. That's the free benefit. Survive the dungeon, leave the dungeon, and you come back factory fresh. My clothes did not get the same treatment. They were still ribbons. The blood was gone, which somehow made it worse. It looked less like I'd been mauled and more like I'd lost a fight with a lawnmower and then done laundry. I pulled up my panel. Level 1, experience 36 out of 100, constitution 11, strength 12, agility 12, spirit 11. For reference, the average adult male in this world sits at 10 across the board, so I was, statistically, slightly above a guy who works in a warehouse. Skill, basic saber technique, level 1. Equipment, cloth armor, damaged. That was the tattered curtain hanging off my shoulders. Starter gear. The class card gives you a bad sword and a bad shirt and wishes you luck. Then I opened my personal space and things got interesting. The Wolf Slayer blade came out silver, slightly curved, narrow, about the length of my arm, and then some black and gray scabbard, the kind of understated that costs money. 40% armor penetration on every hit. And a second line, 80% chance to instantly kill wolf-type enemies at level 5 or under. It's a weapon specifically designed to target wolf-like enemies, no wonder it's called that. But its armor-piercing effect looks pretty good, and the whole knife looks really cool. Look, I'm going to be honest with you for the whole of this story, and honesty starts here. At that moment, in that room, the coolness was a factor. Second item, wolfskin armor. Fine grade, silver gray, fits like it was tailored, excellent against slashing, weak to fire, and roughly 900 degrees too warm for the season. I put it on, felt like I was wearing a bear, and put it straight back in storage. Third item was a small, pale yellow scroll that looked like something you'd find in a drawer. Warrior class skill upgrade scroll, fine grade. Tear it open, and any warrior skill you own jumps to level 3. So I tore it open, the scroll turned to dust, and something poured into my head. Not knowledge, exactly. More like muscle memory that was never mine, arriving all at once. 100 simple, ugly, extremely effective ways to move a blade. And at the same time, my palms started tingling, then my wrists, then my waist, then my legs, like every joint I owned was being quietly adjusted by an invisible mechanic. Basic saber technique, level 3. I took the sword back out and swung it, and the difference wasn't subtle. Before, holding it felt like holding a sword. Now it felt like holding my own arm. If my swordsmanship level 1 was just a beginner's level, now that I'm at level 3, I should be considered a skilled swordsman. I can now take down 3 of my former selves in 1-on-3. 10 seconds. That's what it took. One scroll, 10 seconds, and the guy who died on that wasteland could not have survived 30 seconds against the guy standing in that rented room. And that was 1 pick out of 3 from the very first dungeon of my life. Now, before you get too excited on my behalf, let me close the obvious hole because I promise you, it's the first thing that occurred to me too. If I can just take the rarest thing every single time, why don't I stack 10 rare items in a week and go punch a god? 2 reasons. First, the menu only offers me what that specific monster could ever have dropped. Kill a wolf, get wolf loot. The rare slot on a low-level list is still a low-level rare, and half the time, there's exactly 1 item in it, take it or leave it. Second, I get 3 picks, not 30. 3, sometimes 2, occasionally 4 if the fight was ugly enough, and every single one I take is one I don't take. And third, this one I didn't learn until much later, and it cost me, the dungeon watches. It measures what you can do, and then it decides what you fight next, which means every good choice I made was quietly writing a check that something enormous was going to cash. But that afternoon, I didn't know that. That afternoon, I was a level 1 loser with a rare sword, and I was hungry. So I got out my phone to order takeout, and that's when reality mugged me. The phone rang first. Brother Long, said the screen, and the original owner's memories helpfully informed me this was the man who had sold him the Saber class card, which meant this was the man who had looked at a grieving kid with a pile of savings and handed him the cheapest possible way to die. Brother Chen, I want to ask you, have you finished your first dungeon yet? Just finished playing, Brother Long. Is there anything you need me for? Oh, bro, I don't have anything special to do, but I happen to have a job that's perfect for a new player like you to hone your skills. Ah, there it is. The job was clearing gray zones. I'll get into what those are properly in a minute, but the short version is they're patches of somewhere else that punch into our world. They're full of monsters, and the government pays players to go in and empty them out. The important word in that sentence is our world. Inside a dungeon, if you survive, you get healed for free on the way out. Inside a gray zone, you're in reality. You lose an arm in there, you have lost an arm. Brother Long, for a newbie like me to go and fight Gray Realm monsters is probably just like feeding the enemy. I think I should just give up. He didn't push, he pivoted, instantly, with the smoothness of a man who has never once in his life let a phone call end without a sale. Brother, you really need to improve your strength as soon as possible. I happen to have a batch of excellent grade equipment on hand, including an excellent grade greatsword, which is perfect for your class. Brother Long, how much does that excellent grade greatsword cost? He, Brother Chen, we're old acquaintances. It's a fixed price of only 80,000. 80,000. Brother Long, I can't afford it right now. I'll think about it when I've saved up enough money. I have to go now. Beep, beep, beep. Then I checked my bank balance, and the number that came back was 1,000 and change across every card, total. Goodness, this kid has really gone all out to be a gamer. Not only has he not worked for the past few years, but he's also spent all the money his parents gave him. And that's where I stopped being annoyed with the original owner, because that's where his memories decided to show me the rest of it. He grew up in a small town, healthy parents, a normal family, the kind of childhood that doesn't make a story. He went to the big city after graduating, and one day he got a call telling him his mother and father had been killed by a gang of thugs back home. That was the lie they told him first, because it was kinder. When he got there and pushed hard enough, the officials gave him the truth. His parents had been out walking somewhere ordinary, and a gray zone had opened on top of them. They died to a thing that only players can fight, so he went looking for the player community. He lurked on the forums for months. He scraped together every WAN he had and everything his parents had left him, found a man called Brother Long, and bought the only class card he could afford, the one that puts you at the front, in melee range, with a blunt starter sword. He went into his first dungeon to start becoming strong enough to avenge them. He lasted one fight. Original owner, now that I have inherited everything from you, I will also take on your hatred for the Grey Realm monsters. However, I am still too weak at the moment, and the matter of killing Grey Realm monsters will have to wait until later. And if we don't debate for my second, I meant it. I want that on the record, because a lot of what I did afterward is going to look like a man collecting toys, and it was. But it started here with a dead couple I never met and a kid who bought the worst card in the deck because it was the only one that fit in his hand. Then I ordered the cheapest fast food on the app because a promise to the dead doesn't cover rent. That night, I sat at a laptop and fired off resumes until midnight. The original owner had worked in IT, hadn't worked in over a year, and had a resume with a hole in it you could park a bus in. By 11 the next morning, I'd sent out dozens and gotten back exactly 0, which left option 2. Hopefully the previous reward selection wasn't a fluke. It's dungeon. Start. The world folded, and I was standing in a mountain forest with sunlight coming down through the leaves in long dusty bars and a line of text hanging in the air like a subtitle nobody asked for. Objective: kill a tiger, level 3, level 3. Last time I nearly died to a level 2, and I'd gotten a full grade stronger since then, which meant the universe had helpfully scaled my next fight up so the odds stayed exactly as bad. Thank you. Very balanced. Love the design philosophy. The dungeon gives you teammates. It scoops 2 other players out of wherever they are and drops them in with you strangers. No vetting, no reviews. Mine were a girl in a tracksuit with a steel helmet strapped on like she was going to a construction site, and a short middle-aged man in a hooded cape who I did not see arrive so much as notice had always been there. First time, the girl said, bouncing on her toes. She had a pistol and 12 bullets and shooting level 1, which is to say she had a noisemaker. I've been saving up for this for months. Do you think we'll get something good? Young man, the hooded one didn't look at her. He looked at me, and specifically at my chest. The way you look at a wall you're going to knock down. You stand still and attract its attention from the front. There it is again. 2 dungeons in, 2 guys volunteering me to be the meat. The thing you need to know about him is that he was level 3 on his 7th run and an assassin, a class that goes invisible in shadow. He was on paper the strongest person in that forest, and his entire tactical contribution was going to be waiting behind a tree until somebody bled. I didn't argue. Arguing with a man like that is how you end up dead on schedule. I just walked over and put myself in a rough triangle with the girl where the trees were thick and said nothing and let him work out on his own that he'd been ignored. Then the tiger roared and every bird within a kilometer left at once. It came out of the brush low and fast and enormous, striped, muscled like a truck with fur on it, and the girl did what every first-timer does, which is dump her entire magazine into the biggest part of the target. 12 rounds, every single one hit, not one drop of blood. She stood there with an empty pistol making a sad clicking noise, and the tiger turned its head and looked at her the way I look at a takeout menu. So I moved. The reason I'm alive is a scroll I tore in half in a rented room. Level 3 swordsmanship isn't just swings harder, it is it's knowing in your bones the difference between an attack and a lie. The tiger threw a claw at my face, huge, obvious, and completely fake, a setup so its other paw could open my stomach on the follow-through, and my body simply didn't buy it. My blade came up under the fake and took the leg off at the base. The tiger's momentum carried it forward with 3 legs and a great deal of surprise. I rolled behind a tree and it hit the tree instead. The tree lost. And that was the moment the hooded gentleman was still standing behind cover, watching, doing arithmetic. How long are you going to wait? That got me a crossbow bolt through the tiger's eye. Beautiful shot, honestly. Perfect placement, perfect timing, delivered at the precise second when not shooting would have made him look bad in front of a witness. Here's the part of this world nobody puts on the recruitment poster. Slacking teammates aren't lazy, they're strategic. If you die in a dungeon, your body doesn't come home, and neither does your gear, and your reward chest sits there unclaimed, and the person standing next to your corpse is the one who decides what happens to all of it. Half the accidents in this game are business decisions. We killed the tiger between us, mostly me. The assassin was at his chest before the body finished falling, and by the time I looked up again, he was gone. No goodbye, no split, no eye contact, just a man and his loot evaporating into the trees. Which left me with a problem I hadn't thought about yet. How do you read an invisible menu in front of other people without looking like you're having a stroke? The girl was 10 steps away, reloading, chatty, in no hurry to leave. So I dropped to my knees, clasped my hands, closed my eyes, and prayed to the sky. I want to be clear that this was an improvisation. I have never been a religious man, but nobody in the history of the world has ever walked up to a guy on his knees with his eyes shut and demanded to know what he's looking at, and the menu was already scrolling behind my eyelids. Tiger bone wine, plus 10 constitution and strength for 12 hours. Tiger marrow ointment, heals wounds. A tiger head ring, a tiger tail bracelet, the usual junk drawer. Then in the good tier, tiger blood medicine, permanent plus 2 constitution and strength, does not stack, one time only. And then, sitting at the bottom of the list in its own category with a drop rate of basically never, Tiger Soul True Mark, rare, passive, plus 5 to all attributes. Active, Tiger Fury. For 15 minutes, every attack you land also does level 5 Tiger Spirit soul damage, twice a day, soul damage. Not more damage. Damage to the thing driving the body. I took the mark, the blood medicine, and the ointment. I kept my eyes shut for a respectful extra 3 seconds, so the performance had a proper ending. Does praying really work? The girl was standing over me with her helmet pushed back, genuinely curious. I want you to remember this exchange because it is going to come back at the end of this story in a way that I could not possibly have predicted while kneeling in tiger blood. Sincerity brings results, I said, but whether it works depends on the person. She thought about that very seriously. Then she told me she'd gotten 2 boxes of regular bullets and a regular bracer, which is a fine haul for a first run. I congratulated her. I took my entire chest into my storage and walked out of that forest. 2 seconds after I vanished, the assassin stepped out from behind a tree where he had absolutely not gone home. He'd been watching my sword. He'd been watching the way I'd read a level 4 feint at level 1, and the conclusion he arrived at, standing alone in an emptying dungeon, was, this newbie is definitely not simple. His blade is well past excellent quality. Could he be an elite seed of some cult? Better not to provoke him. I got that man's entire respect by owning a knife and refusing to be bait. I'd like to say I earned it. Mostly, I just didn't die on command. Back in the rented room, the Tiger Soul True Mark turned out to be a square of yellow paper with a blood-red tiger's head painted on it, which looked less like a legendary artifact and more like something you'd buy from a folding table outside a temple. I slapped it on my right upper arm. It crawled in, not painfully, just the red ink went dark and moved and settled under the skin as a black tattoo of a tiger's head, and when I flexed my arm, the tiger flexed with it. I have a permanent tattoo I did not choose the design of, and honestly, of everything that happened to me that month, it's in the top 3 weirdest. Then I drank the tiger blood medicine, which tasted like a battery and burned all the way down until it suddenly completely stopped. Constitution 18, strength 19, agility 17, spirit 16. 2 days earlier, I'd been an 11 across the board. The average person in this world sits at 10. I had just become, in every physical sense, 2 men. And these aren't video game numbers with no body attached. Constitution is how hard you are to break and how fast you knit back together. Strength is how much force you put through anything and how fast you move it. Agility is reaction and coordination, not just speed, but the ability to make your limbs do the thing your brain ordered immediately, correctly. And spirit is perception and magic. It's the reason I could smell rain coming and hear a conversation through a wall. I stood in the middle of my rented room with my new arms hanging off me, and I had exactly one practical thought. I might use too much force and break the doors and windows. Hurry, we probably trying choice not and ring. The next morning, I went shopping and I finally learned what money looks like in this world. Tianhua Pedestrian Street, Dongjiang City. There's a storefront there called the Player Mall, which from the outside is a video game shop, consoles in the window, a rack of hoodies, a bored kid at the counter. The floor is a costume. The business is upstairs. Tier 1 is common equipment, which they don't even buy because it's worth less than the paperwork. Tier 2 is fine. Tier 3 is rare and above. And the single most important thing I learned that day, the rule that explains this entire economy, is this. Real-world weapons do not work in dungeons. Take a rifle in with you, and it turns into nothing. Only dropped gear crosses over, which means every bullet fired in a dungeon is a bullet that dropped from a monster, and there is no factory anywhere on Earth that can make more of them. Ammunition is the one thing nobody ever has enough of. I had most of a box of fine-grade pistol rounds and 2 junk starter items. I stood at that counter and haggled like my grandmother at a fish market, right up to the point of picking my stuff up and walking toward the stairs. 45,000 yuan from 1 box of bullets and some trash. I was still standing there recalibrating my entire sense of scale when the hall cleared out around me. A young man came up the stairs with 6 bodyguards, and the bodyguards were armed, and the staff didn't ask them to stop being armed. He walked past every case without slowing down, stopped at the one at the end, pointed at a rare grade submachine gun, and bought it. 6,300,000 cash equivalent, no financing, no flinch. I did the math on the way down the stairs, and it came out to a house, not an apartment, a house in the capital, where the houses are worst in the world, expensive. And when I asked the receptionist, in the tone of a man who is definitely a serious buyer, just gathering information, whether that was the ceiling, she laughed at me. The flagship store in the capital had recently moved an excellent grade weapon, 1 billion. That's the ladder, and I want you to hold it in your head for the rest of this story, because I'm going to be climbing it. Common, fine, rare, excellent, and then epic, a grade that exists on paper that nobody in the entire world has ever confirmed obtaining. While I was standing there recovering, the receptionist gave me the rest of the tour because I had just sold her 45,000 yuan of merchandise, and that buys about 10 minutes of a professional's patience. The class card market, she said, is the real business. Everything else is downstream of it. A gunslinger card, she quoted, starts around 300,000, mage 400, assassin 600, and rising. Summoner and Spirit Mage don't have prices, they have waiting lists, and the waiting lists have interviews. And Saber, she checked out of politeness and then told me anyway, 11,000. 11,001 for the right to walk into a place where things eat people, holding a piece of metal in a world where everybody else brings a gun. That's the whole story of the original owner of this body in one number. He didn't choose melee because he wanted to be a swordsman. He chose it because it was the only door that opened for the money in his pocket, and the reason it was cheap is that the market had done the arithmetic on his survival and had priced it accordingly. I asked her casually what a saber's proper gear cost. For a serious one, 2 million and up, she shrugged. But nobody buys serious saber gear. Sabers don't live long enough to justify it, so the shops don't stock it. So the ones who might have lived don't get it either. She said this in the exact tone of a woman explaining shipping delays. It's a circle. I thanked her. Then I walked out onto Tianhua Street with 45,000 yuan, a tiger under my skin, and a very clear understanding of exactly how far down the mountain I was standing. Then I got on the bus home, and the bus fell out of the world. It happened between one stop and the next, and the first thing I noticed was that the world had gone quiet. Not quiet like traffic dying down, quiet like somebody had unplugged it. The engine sound was there, and then it was a memory of a sound, and every single person on that bus, the driver, the old man with the shopping bag, the 2 students, the woman standing by the rear door, was sitting or standing perfectly still with their eyes closed, swaying slightly like a bus full of mannequins somebody had propped up for a joke. Outside the windows, Dongjiang City was gone. Fog, mud where the street had been. This is a gray zone. Somewhere else pushes into here, and the here stops existing. If you're not a player, you don't get to participate. You just freeze and stand there, and if nobody clears the zone before it settles, you die on your feet. And if it settles anyway, that piece of the city becomes permanent wasteland with monsters in it forever. I had my blade out before I finished standing up. I advise you not to open the door now. Second row, a girl in a white baseball cap, light brown hair cut to her jaw, sitting perfectly calmly with her hands in her lap like she was waiting for her stop. The only other person on that bus with their eyes open, that was Zhongli. She raised a hand and something came up out of the floor beside her. A long-haired woman in white, translucent, cold enough that the windows near her fogged from the inside. A spirit mage, summoner. One of the rarest classes there is, and the reason I know that is that everyone in this world knows it, the way everyone knows a lottery winner's name. Then I looked out the window and stopped being interested in her class. There were over 100 of them coming across the mud. Humanoid, roughly, if you squint, black-purple skin, limbs that jointed like an insect's, faces that had settled on demon and committed. They ran the way spiders run, too many legs worth of speed on 2 legs. And behind them, not running, came one that was 3 times their size, crawling slowly, in no hurry at all. It wasn't chasing us, it was supervising. The windows came in all at once. Zhang Li's ghost took the first head that came through the frame, split it clean, and kept moving. I put myself 2 meters in front of her in the aisle, which sounds gallant and was actually just geometry. A bus is a corridor, and a corridor is the best thing that can happen to a man with a sword and no friends. They came at me 4 and 5 at a time, and I cut them into pieces, and somewhere around the 20th one, I realized something that made my stomach drop in a good way. These things were weaker than the wolf that killed the original owner of this body. These were the monsters that murdered a city block, and they were softer than my first day. I want to explain what fighting in a bus is actually like because I have since fought in an ocean, on a mountaintop, and inside a god's domain, and none of them taught me as much as those 4 minutes. A bus aisle is 60 centimeters wide. That is narrower than a sword is long, which means every strike is a thrust, or a short vertical cut, and the two-handed technique a scroll had poured into me was almost entirely useless. What worked was the short stuff, the ugly stuff, the strikes you'd be embarrassed to be seen making, straight in, straight out, no follow-through, footwork measured in inches, windows on both sides, which meant they came at my flanks as well as my front, and every 4 or 5 seconds I had to give up the aisle for half a step to deal with an arm coming through a window frame at hip height, and behind me, 22 frozen human beings sitting in their seats with their eyes closed, none of whom would move if I lost. The old man with the shopping bag was in the 3rd row on my left. I had to plant a foot next to his knee twice. By the 3rd minute, my forearms were burning in a way that no amount of strength stat prevents. I understood in a very practical way why this world's answer to monsters is guns, and why the men who sell class cards price a sword at 11,000 yuan. And I still won, because whatever the original owner had thought he was buying, he had accidentally bought the front row of the only fight that had ever mattered to him. The big one arrived at the window and looked in at us, and it did not look like an animal looking. It studied the bus. It found Zhang Li behind me and understood in about a second and a half which of us was the one worth killing. Let's clear this place out first, she called over the noise. Then we'll team up and take it down. Maybe we'll get some decent rewards. I nearly stopped fighting. Rewards? Out here? In the real world. The big one reached in through the window frame, a long, boneless, fleshy arm going past me for her. And I want to be honest about the next 3 seconds because they were the first time in this world I did something purely because I wanted to and not because I'd calculated it. I took the heads off the 3 in front of me, went up over the seat backs, and cut the arm off at the shoulder. That one had real weight behind it. First thing in this world that fought my blade instead of parting for it. It shrieked and pulled back, and I found the last small one in the rear of the bus, crouched over a frozen passenger, gnawing at the man's skull like a kid with corn on the cob. 1 strike. Done. And that's when the sniper opened up. The first shot came from outside, from somewhere far off, and punched a bowl-sized hole clean through the big monster's torso, not the Bureau. The Bureau evacuates civilians first. It's the whole reason they exist. This was a player, and he wasn't here to save anyone. The second shot went through the monster and kept going and hit Zhang Li's ghost, which should be impossible. Spirit bullets, ammunition specifically designed to kill things that don't have bodies, so we went flat. He kept firing, unhurried, professional, and an eagle-shaped summon circled overhead, spotting for him, and the big monster came apart under it and fell. I lay under a bus seat with my face in somebody's dropped shopping, listening to a man steal my kill. And then from where I was lying, hidden, forgotten, a reward panel opened in the real world, in front of my eyes. I hadn't cleared a dungeon. I just killed things in a gray zone, which every player on Earth does every week, and which pays out exactly nothing to anyone. The eagle screamed past the bus, came in through a broken window, screamed, and left. Then the trucks arrived, and men in dark green were shouting, Team 1, surround the scene. Team 2, prepare to attack. Team 3, evacuate the civilians. And a gun barrel appeared under my seat about 6 inches from my nose. Stretch out your arms and slowly crawl out. Meanwhile, somewhere a few blocks away, a tall, thin man in glasses was walking off into the fog with his rifle over his shoulder, and the thought going around in his head was, why didn't I get any rewards after killing that thing? Is my luck really that bad? Buddy, it's not your luck. They took us to the Dongjiang 2nd Bureau, and the investigator who rode with us was named Fanghua, level 12, and she was lovely, warm, funny, asked good questions, made 2 people who'd just been in a monster attack feel like they were on a school trip. Then she asked Zhang Li what her class was, Spirit Mage, and I watched a professional recruiter's face do the thing a slot machine does when the reels line up. Then she asked me, "Saber," and I got a nod. A polite, brief, well-meaning nod followed immediately by another question directed at Jiang Li. They released me in about an hour. On my way out, I walked past an office door that hadn't been closed properly, and through it, I could hear them talking to Jiang Li about compensation, about personal development plans, about her excellent grade bonus, about her rare class bonus. Discrimination. That's what that is. Blatant institutional discrimination against the Saber class. When are we melee physical players finally going to stand up for ourselves? I went home and opened the reward panel that had been waiting patiently in the corner of my eye the whole time. Ghoul-themed list, 2 picks, junk, 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 and then 1 line in the rare tier that I read 4 times. Chapter of Obscurity, 2 effects, colluding. Evil creatures below boss level treat you as one of their own kind and will not attack you unless you provoke them. Darkness, enemies within 13 meters of you take 7% more damage from your attacks. It came out as a brass pentagram on a chain about the size of a coin, dull, cheap looking. Turn it over, and the back isn't a pattern. It's 2 rows of teeth, and they don't belong to anything anyone's ever cataloged. I put it on and never took it off. It looks like a 50 yuan pendant from a night market. It is the single most useful object I own, and I say that having later held things that could kill armies. Second pick was another warrior upgrade scroll. 10% chance to push my saber technique to level 4. It failed. 10 seconds of light in my palms, a fizzle, and dust. Somewhere out there is a great and unknowable being who designs these reward tables. I would like 5 minutes alone with them and a chair. That night, I got on the player forum, which the Bureau runs, and which lives on the dark web because of course it does. Bureau's recruiting again, level 50 and up. A level 48 veteran had posted a clear guide for a mid-tier dungeon, and people were arguing about it in the comments like it was a video game and not a place people go to die. Which brings me to the pinned announcement. 2,139 players confirmed dead in dungeons this month, including a level 43 veteran. Below that, a thread claiming India had picked up 12 new permanent gray zones this month, and the government was denying all of it. Below that, something about a massacre in May country that everyone was quietly certain had been done by a person, not a monster. And at the very bottom of my own inbox, sitting there like a joke, was an interview invitation. TNU Bay game, small studio, 11 a.m. tomorrow. That's right. I had a rare blade, a soul tattoo, an artifact around my neck, and 2,000 of my colleagues had died that month, and I was going to a job interview because rent exists in every universe. But first, one more dungeon. Flat grassland this time, horizon in every direction, and about 100 meters off, there was a boar the size of a car digging a hole with 2 fangs that curved up past its own eyes. Objective: kill the nearby wild boar, level 3, and my teammates were the 2 worst human beings the universe could find on short notice. The first was a chubby kid, 17, maybe 18, glasses, no weapon in his hands at all, standing there the color of paper and shaking so hard I could hear his belt buckle. A week ago, in his first dungeon, something had eaten half of him. He'd survived it. He had come back. The second was a level 2 gunslinger in a black trench coat who took one look at the 2 of us and started issuing orders. You 2 listen to my commands and go first. Create opportunities for me. I advise you to speak more respectfully. He did not take the advice. He escalated, loudly, in the direction of my face, and while he was doing that, the kid with the glasses broke. "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." And he ran. I've thought about that moment a lot since. He didn't run at the start, when he could have. He waited until there were 2 adults arguing about who'd be bait, and then his body just decided for him. The boar abandoned the hole and everything in it and went straight for him. Not for me, not for the loud one, for the one running away. The dungeon aggroes the runner. There is no cowardice option in here. It's not that fleeing is discouraged, it's that fleeing puts a target on your back at the system level. He looked over his shoulder once at the end. 2 curved fangs and 2 red eyes, and then, in his own words, if he'd had time for words, the ever-changing grassland, the blue sky, the white clouds, and the dark. The trenchcoat man started screaming at me to go tank it. Then he pointed his pistol at my head. "If you don't fight, I'll kill you first." He never got to the end of the sentence because I had already been drifting toward him for the last 10 seconds. Not obviously, just a step here, a half step there, the way you close distance on a dog you don't trust. I moved inside the barrel and took his gun hand off at the wrist. Now, here is where I made my mistake, and I want to lay it out plainly because I paid for it and the payment was memorable. I picked up the pistol still attached to its hand, which I'd like to formally complain about. And then I looked at the boar coming. I looked at the screaming man in front of me, and I made a choice. I stepped behind him. The boar went through him like a truck through a fence. I didn't stab him. I didn't push him. I just chose which side of a man to stand on, and that turned out to be enough for what came next. But the boar was still alive, and now it was my problem. I opened a long gash down its flank and it didn't care. Its hide was thicker than the tiger's, and I was starting to understand that level 3 covers a lot of ground. I tried the pistol I just inherited, which is a thing I'd been doing at a shooting range for about 4 hours total. 3 shots, 1 hit, fantastic marksmanship. Put it away. Tiger, blazing fire. Do I have to say it out loud? No. Did I say it out loud? Absolutely, every single time, for the rest of my career, and I will not be taking questions. Tiger Fury doesn't make you stronger. It puts the presence of an apex predator on you, and I watched a 1-ton animal that had just killed 2 people feel fear for the first time in its life. It slowed. Its ears went back. Something in its lizard brain sat up and said, "We are not the biggest thing in this field anymore." Then it charged anyway, head low, going for the pierce. I jumped, clean over its back, blade reversed and held straight down. I opened it from shoulder to hip, 4 inches deep, 6 feet long, and landed behind it while the tiger spirit went into the wound with the steel. It got up. It took 2 steps. And then the soul damage caught up with it, and it just stood there trembling, an animal with the lights on and nobody home. I walked around to the front and put the blade through its heart. Level 2, +1 strength. Personal space expanded by 1 cubic meter, which sounds like nothing and is actually the difference between carrying a sword and carrying a business. The reward panel opened, and then it closed. You are about to enter the punishment level. Countdown. 3, 2, 1. No explanation, no appeal, no interface, no "would you like to contest this?" The great unknowable being that runs this system does not negotiate, it notifies. I landed on a mountaintop under a moon, on a flat stone plateau with sheer drops on 3 sides, and there was a man standing there in a mask. Saber class, same as me. He came at me with his sword already drawn and killing intent coming off him like heat off asphalt. I got my blade up in time to hear the sound our steel made, which was, and this was the important part, the sound of his sword cracking. He wasn't as strong as me, his knife wasn't as good as mine. Once I knew both those things, the fight became a technical problem, and I'd had 10 years of technical answers poured into my hands by a scroll. He never said a word, not one, the entire fight. He didn't taunt, he didn't shout, he didn't make a sound when I opened his forearm, and the mask meant I couldn't see whether he was afraid or bored or 100 years old. I've fought a lot of people since, almost all of them talk. It's how you tell yourself you're winning. We bound blades, twisted, broke apart, closed again. Twice he tried a technique I didn't recognize, and both times my hands answered it before my head had a name for it, which is what a scroll buys you. Once he got inside my guard, and I got a boot into his chest and put him 4 meters back. He came off the ground before he'd finished landing, which is what practice buys you. I backed him toward the cliff edge, and I watched him look down, and I watched him decide. He didn't try to escape. He came in on a suicide line, took my blade through his chest on purpose, and used his last half second of forward momentum to put his broken knife into my waist. You have passed the punishment test. I bled out of that dungeon and lay on my floor for a while, thinking about how close that had been. Punishment levels give no rewards. They also give no healing on the way out. Every injury you take in there comes home with you and can absolutely kill you in your own apartment. What saved me was the wolfskin armor eating most of the thrust, and the fact that the tiger spirit had gotten into him first, so he died a half beat before he could put his weight behind it. The boar's unclaimed reward list came back once I was home, which was decent of the system, all things considered. Iron Mountain Belt, rare, 0.6% physical damage reduction per point of constitution, capped at 60%. I stared at that. With 18 constitution, that was already 11%, and constitution is the stat I could grow forever. Why is something like this only rare? And then I remembered my own sword, 40% armor penetration. That's why. In a world where penetration exists, armor is a negotiation, not a wall. I took the belt, a fine-grade pistol with a 20% accuracy bonus, and a 12-round magazine, and a ring that doubles my healing rate and doubles it again when I'm nearly dead. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and worked out why I'd been punished. Not the deserter. His death was on him and on the rules. Not the severed hand. That man pointed a gun at my head. The system has no problem with self-defense. It was the step. It was standing behind a maimed man, so a boar would go through him instead of me. That's the line. Not violence. Arrangement. And once I understood it, I made myself a rule and I have kept it. If I ever fall out with a teammate again, I don't maneuver, I don't arrange, I don't get clever. The moment he makes a move, I kill him with 1 strike, cleanly, and I take whatever the system thinks about that. The next morning, I put on my only good shirt and went to a job interview. Half an hour in a waiting room, 10 minutes with an HR woman who asked me where I saw myself in 5 years and did not write down my answer. A handshake, go back and wait for our notification. The whole thing was a formality. The studio had a headcount quota, and I was quota. I've been on both sides of that conversation in 2 different worlds now, and it's the same conversation. I was standing at a suburban bus stop afterward, still in the shirt, feeling like the least impressive man in the province, when a girl with a suitcase sat down next to me. "Oh, it's you," Jiang Li, white cap, same as before, moving into the bureau's dormitory. She joined in 2 days flat, which apparently is what happens when you're a spirit mage and the country is short-staffed enough to simplify procedures. She offered immediately, without me asking, which is the entire reason she matters to this story, to find out whether they'd take melee players too. We swapped numbers. The answer came by text that evening. Melee minimum is level 10, and even then you need a special evaluation. Level 10. I was level 2. She also mentioned, casually, that she was shadowing Fanghua now, learning Gray Zone response and how they hunt down criminal players. I sold the dead man's pistol at a different shop on Tianhua Street because walking into the same store twice with a dead man's gear is how you become a case file. That put my balance around 50,000. Then I found the cheapest live fire range in the city and started burning through it. That's not a figure of speech. Every real-world bullet costs money, and every hour costs money. I stood in a booth for 2 days putting rounds down range until my 1 in 3 became something a person could rely on. I watched my bank balance drain like a bathtub, because that was the trap I was in, and I'd like you to appreciate the shape of it. I was carrying rare-grade equipment worth millions. I could not sell a single piece of it, because the instant a level 2, nobody walks into a shop with an artifact, somebody makes a phone call, and then a man with 6 bodyguards comes to ask where I got it, sitting on a mountain of treasure and slowly becoming a vagrant, which meant the only way out was through. So, dungeon, hills, scrub, and the mouth of a cave going down into a hillside like a bad decision made visible. Objective, defeat the black bear, level 3, inside the cave. My teammate that day was a mage, level 3, with a fine grade staff patterned in red, and fireball at level 3, and a mouth. With my fireball, even level 4 or 5 monsters are no problem. There was also a chubby gunslinger girl, level 1, whose entire function in this dungeon was to tell him he was amazing at regular intervals, which she performed flawlessly. He looked at me and said what all of them say: "You go in and lure it out." "It's a matter of strategy," I said, "not whether you're a man or not." Because that's the argument they always reach for, right? Not, "Here's why the plan works," but, "Are you scared?" I've heard it in 2 worlds. It never once came from someone who was planning to go first. He called me a coward. Then he shouldered his staff and walked into the cave alone to prove a point. I turned to the girl and told her to stay exactly where she was. She wanted to follow him, and I want to be fair to her. From where she stood, a level 3 mage with a fine staff going after a level 3 bear is a fair fight with good odds, and hanging back looks like exactly what he said it was. So I explained it. The dungeon builds the encounter around the party. It had looked at a level 3 and a level 2 and a level 1. It had decided that we together were worth a level 3 bear. Which means the bear is not the whole bill. When the system's arithmetic says 3 players and the target says 1 monster, the difference isn't generosity. There is always more than one thing in the cave. We heard the crack about 90 seconds later, then a scream, then a lot more cracking, and the ground came alive under our feet. "Run, this place is about to collapse." I got maybe 40 meters. The hill didn't cave in. It sat down. A whole landscape feature lowered itself into its own basement with a sound like the sky clearing its throat. And when the dust settled, there was no cave, no mage, and no girl, because she'd frozen for 2 seconds at the wrong moment, and 2 seconds was the whole margin. A fireball in a cave with a low ceiling. He'd fought his way to the last thing he'd ever be right about. The reward panel that opened for me had 4 slots instead of 3, which is the system's way of saying it noticed. Berserk bracers. Fine. Every melee hit you land grants Berserk for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Each stack plus 4% attack speed and movement speed plus 7% physical damage. Rage gauntlets. Fine. Only function while wearing the bracers, plus 1 strength at the start of combat, and plus 1 more strength for every stack of Berserk. Then a Bear Clan Mage headband, rare, absolutely useless to me. I took it purely because a rare item is a bar of gold with a resale value. 4th slot, another warrior scroll. Failed again, 2 for 2. I'd like to thank the great unknowable being for its consistency. Then I went home, put on the bracers and the gauntlets, and started experimenting. Here's what the item descriptions say. Land a melee hit. Here's what they don't say. On what? I hit a bush. Berserk, 1 stack. I hit the bush again. 2 stacks. I hit a rock, a patch of dirt, and a puddle in that order, and my body lit up like someone had turned a dial. I stood in a vacant lot at 11 at night, slapping a wall with a rare sword like the world's most dangerous idiot. 3 stacks. Strength 24, up from 20, 12% faster, 21% more damage, and I could refresh it forever. All I had to do was keep hitting things, and the world is made entirely of things. The unknown great being who wrote these rewards has clearly never heard the words attribute balance, and I want to be very clear that I was not going to be the one to tell it. 2 days later, the Bureau put up a notice that changed how I dressed. Foreign criminal players had gotten into the country and scattered into the major cities. Extremely dangerous, wanted, and the part that made my eyebrows go up. Kill on sight authorized for capable players with a bounty attached. Dongjiang is a top 10 city. That's not a coincidence. That's a shopping list. So I stopped leaving the house unarmed. Blade in storage, belt on, pendant under the shirt, ring on my hand. If you'd passed me on the street, you'd have seen a broke guy in his 20s with a cheap necklace. Then dungeon. Forest thick and the objective read, kill the silverback gorilla, level 4, and my 2 teammates were level 2. The gunslinger wore black leather and glasses and carried a common revolver with marksmanship level 2, which meant a 90% hit rate, a real number from a real professional. The other was a mage in a plaid shirt with ice arrow at level 2, 30% slow for 12 seconds. Competent people, both of them. Both of them also spent the first 2 minutes staring at my equipment and trying to work out how a level 2 was walking around with that blade. I shut the conversation down so hard and so fast that they gave up and started calling me boss instead. Fine, boss works. The problem was not the silverback. The problem was that the silverback had friends. A dozen ordinary gorillas spread through the trees around him, any 3 of which could take the 2 of them apart. So I volunteered to be bait. Yes, I'm aware. I had refused that job 3 times, and now I was raising my hand for it. And the difference is that this time it was my plan. I picked a clearing 300 meters back, walked out where the boss could see me, and before anything else, I hit the ground 3 times with the flat of my blade. Bush, dirt, rock, 3 stacks up. Then I started throwing fruit at a 3-meter gorilla. I'd like it noted that this worked, and I'd like to explain why it had to be fruit. If I'd shot it, the whole troop would have come. Gunfire is an event. A dozen gorillas hear an event and they arrive together, and then I'm a man in a clearing with 13 problems. But a piece of fruit hitting the boss in the back of the head is not an event. It's an insult, and an insult is personal, and personal is exactly 1 gorilla. So I stood there at 80 meters lobbing mangoes at a 3-meter silverback while a dozen of its relatives watched with mild interest and did not get involved because it was, correctly, none of their business. It took 9 throws. The first 6 it ignored. The 7th it turned around 4. The 8th it stood up 4. The 9th I got it right on the ear. When it charged, it came alone because a silverback doesn't need help with 1 man, and everybody in the troop knows it. I ran. It followed 300 meters into the clearing past the 2 guys lying flat in the ferns. Fire. My fine round went into its chest and took out a hole the size of my fist. The revolver put 3 into its head. The ice arrow hit its legs and took a third of its speed away. It kept coming anyway because it weighed 1,000 kilos and it was extremely upset. It leapt. I went sideways, holstered the pistol mid-motion, said the words, "Tiger," and came up behind it as it landed. 1 cut, the head came off, and what came out of the neck was a column of blood thicker than my waist, and the 2 of them in the ferns started shouting like their team had won something. "Boss, you took down the boss in 1 hit." And here's the thing, and it's the only reason I'm telling you this scene in this much detail. It wasn't 1 hit, it was a rare blade with 40% armor penetration. It was 3 stacks of berserkin rage stacked before the fight began. It was strength 24, 2.5 times a normal man's. It was level 3 swordsmanship. In a body that had practiced it for 10 years, it never lived. It was a tiger spirit going into the wound and hollowing the thing out from the inside. And it was a brass pentagram under my shirt, quietly adding 7% to everything within 13 meters. 6 things, none of which anybody could see, all landing on the same neck at the same moment. That's what 1 hit means. It means everything before the hit. Then the reward panel opened and I nearly forgot how to stand up. 6 rare items. 6. In 1 list, the Ape King ring set, 1 for every class in existence. Wrath of the Ape King Warrior, 15% chance for a melee attack to deal double damage. Hatred Mage, 30% resistance penetration. Grudge Summoner, plus 3 levels to your summons. Sorrow, Gunslinger, 35% focus chance. Pain Assassin, 30% stealth penetration. Wound, Priest, 30% to divine effects. I took Wrath, obviously. Then I took Hatred and Sorrow too, which was, on the face of it, insane. I'm a saber. I will never cast a fireball, and rings for other classes are dead weight in a bag. But changing class in this world isn't impossible. It's locked behind level 30, and a mountain of money and connections I did not have. I was level 3 at the time. I bought 2 rings for a man I might get to be in 5 years. That's the kind of optimism that only survives in people who have recently gotten very lucky. And then I checked my bank balance, and it said 30,000, and the optimism went quiet. The range had eaten 20,000 when, in a week, I was carrying, on my body, items worth somewhere north of 10 million, and every single one of them was unsellable because the moment a nobody walks into a shop with a rare artifact, a phone rings somewhere, and then a car pulls up. I was seriously considering a fake beard and a train to the capital when my phone buzzed. Jiang Li, her team was short-handed. They were hiring day laborers to clear low-level gray zones, 300 to 5,000 yuan a day depending on the zone, cash, no paperwork beyond a signature. She had been in the bureau for 2 days and she was already acting team leader, which tells you everything you need to know about how badly they needed people. I said yes in about 4 seconds, and I'd love to tell you it was for the money. It was mostly for the menus, because here's what I'd worked out on that bus lying under a seat with my face in a stranger's groceries. Dungeons give me one reward list once when I clear them, but gray zone monsters, real monsters, in the real world, the ones every player in the country kills for free every single day, those give me a list too, every day, in addition, and nobody else on Earth gets so much as a receipt. Signing up as a Bureau Day laborer took 10 minutes and one form, name, class, level, next of kin. That last box is not a formality, and everybody in the room knows it. Zhang Li's team was 2 people. Zhang Li was one of them. The other was a kid called Zhang Ming, 17, maybe 18, wraparound sunglasses, indoors, a rifle, a meter long slung across his back, and the general silhouette of a teenage war criminal. He'd awakened as a gunslinger mid-semester and transferred schools over it, which in this world is roughly what happens to a kid who gets scouted by a professional sports team, except the sport kills 2,000 people a month. He looked me over with the frank rudeness of a teenager. Brother Fan, are you level 20? Level 2. He laughed. Then he stopped laughing because I hadn't. Brother Fan is about the same level as us, Zhang Li said smoothly from behind a clipboard, not looking up, but he is very strong. I've thought about that sentence a lot. She'd watched me cut a monster's arm off through a bus window. She had every reason to ask what I actually was. She asked me nothing that day or any day after, and instead she stood between me and a curious kid with one line and moved us on to the briefing. That's not naivety. That's a person deciding on purpose to be the kind of friend she'd want to have. The briefing, Hotan Road, over 300 monsters, all below level 5. It had to be cleared before 2 in the afternoon because a gray zone that hasn't been cleared by then starts to set like concrete, and after it sets, that road stops being a road forever. My job title, officially, was bodyguard. I dressed for the part. Armor, bracers, blade E, and nothing else visible. No belt on the outside. Ring turned inward, pendant under the collar. A level 2 saber with decent starter gear and more courage than sense. That was the man I wanted them to see. And it took me 20 minutes in front of a mirror to build him. The cordon was a double line of dark green uniforms and a lot of very frightened civilians being moved backward down a street they'd walked down that morning. The officer who lifted the tape for us was in his 50s, heavy-set with a metal ribbon on his chest and gray coming in at the temples. He looked at the 3 of us, a girl, a teenager, and a broke guy with a sword, with an expression I did not expect. Envy. Being young is great, he said. If I could be 20 years younger, I could definitely join a new battlefield. Then he held the tape higher so Zhang Ming's rifle wouldn't catch and waved us into a fog bank where 300 monsters were waiting. Inside, Wotan Road was a jungle. I mean that literally, not overgrown, replaced. Where a shop street had been, there were hundreds of meters of dense green canopy ringed by open grassland, wet air, insects, the whole ecosystem dropped into the middle of a city of 9 million people. Somewhere under that root system, there was a noodle place I'd eaten at twice. The monsters were twisted green things like walking roots, dozens of them, and Zhang Li's ghost went through the first cluster the way a lawnmower goes through a flower bed. Ration your shots, she told Zhang Ming, who had already put his eye to the scope and was making happy noises. With gray zone outbreaks increasing, ammo supply is going to get scarce. There's like 100 of them. Then make it 100 bullets. So we did it the ugly way. I went in and got about 30 of them interested in me, and then I ran in a big lazy circle around the clearing while a 17-year-old picked them off my tail one at a time, and every time one got close enough to swing at, I'd cut it in half without breaking stride and pick up another berserk stack. It took 2 hours. It was, in every meaningful sense, farm work. Zhang Ming talked for all of it. That's not a complaint. It was the best thing about that day. He talked about his old school and his new school, and about a girl in his class who had awakened as a priest and immediately transferred out because her parents wouldn't allow it. He talked about a video he'd seen where somebody claimed to have cleared a dungeon solo at level 9. He asked me 4 separate times in 4 different phrasings exactly how I was doing what I was doing, and each time I gave him a different useless answer and he accepted it cheerfully and asked again 20 minutes later. Around the 90th minute, he stopped mid-sentence. Brother Fan, behind you. There was a root thing coming out of the canopy above and slightly behind my left shoulder at a speed those things should not be capable of. He had seen it through a scope from 90 meters while talking about a girl in his class. He put a round through it before I finished turning. Huh? Did you see that? Did you see that? Zhang Li, did you? I saw it. Ration your shots. I rationed that one. He was 17 years old and he had been a player for 4 months. He was better with that rifle than any gunslinger I had shared a dungeon with. And at the end of it, I asked the question I'd been holding all day. Where's the boss? There isn't one, Zhang Li said, checking her watch. There's a grader. A grader is a bureau assassin stealth class sent into a new zone the moment it opens to explore it. Find the strongest thing in it, rank the zone's danger, and call in a team size to match. And since he's already there and already alone with it, and it's already gonna die anyway, he killed it. He took the reward. That's allowed? She shrugged. That's basically a default rule. So that's how it works. The man who scouts the room keeps the prize, and the people who clear the room get an hourly rate. I felt a great and immediate kinship with every temp worker in every world. The zone collapsed around 4 in the afternoon, folding up and putting the street back roughly where it had been, and the officer with the medal came in with his people to do the count. 6 civilians had been inside when it opened. All 6 had already perished. Nobody said anything about it. Zhang Ming took his sunglasses off for the first time all day and put them back on. Zhang Li signed the form. I stood on a road that had been a jungle 40 minutes ago and thought about a couple in a small town who went out for a walk one afternoon. The second zone was easier and worse. A grove outside a village found late. It had gone almost a full day undiscovered, which meant it was nearly set. Inside was a cave, 1 kilometer long, winding pitch black with lizards on the walls and bats in the ceiling. We took miners' helmets out of the car trunk, which is the least heroic piece of equipment I have ever worn. Halfway in, something came off the ceiling behind me in complete darkness, and I killed it without turning around. I want to describe this properly because it was the moment I first understood what my numbers had actually done to me. I did not hear it. There was nothing to hear. I did not see it because there was no light. What happened was that a piece of the dark got heavier, and I knew where, and I knew how fast, and my arm went up and my blade went through it, and then a bat fell on the floor. Spirit 16. That's what perception means when you push it past human. I took the rear for the rest of that cave, which meant I fought without stopping for 20 minutes while the other 2 worked forward, and by the time we reached the dead end, I was covered in things I'd rather not itemize. We sat down to rest. Zhang Li sent her ghost drifting through the rock the way you check the next room because she could, and then she went very still. There's something in the wall, not a monster, a statue, human-shaped, buried inside solid rock, hidden. We cut it out, and it was a woman, veiled, and where her face should have been, there was nothing at all. One hand held a dagger, the other held a plate of apples. Zhang Ming pulled up the bureau database on his phone and read it out loud. He read it fast because he was already excited. Special event E556, the goddess of fortune, also filed in the same entry as the goddess of calamity. Each player may touch it once. What happens after that is random. If the apples glow, you get something good. Equipment, a skill, a potion, a buff, a healing, an attribute point. If the dagger glows, you get something bad. Electrocution, burns, freezing, a rock falling on you, an arrow, a stun. Has anyone ever died? I asked. No recorded deaths, Zhang Ming said, already rolling his sleeve up. He put his palm on the statue. The plate of apples lit up soft gold. The light poured down over him, and when it faded, he was holding a pair of cloth shoes. Ordinary cloth shoes. Grade, common, not enchanted, not blessed. Shoes. He stared at them for a long moment. They're comfortable, he said with tremendous dignity. Zhang Li went next, and the dagger lit up. A rock the size of a fist appeared above her head and dropped, and her ghost was between it and her skull before I finished flinching. It came apart into gravel and dust in mid-air. She brushed the dust off her cap without any particular reaction and stepped back. Your turn. Now, here's my problem. I did not want to touch that thing. I had already worked out that my cheat doesn't care what the source is, dungeon chests, gray zone kills, and I strongly suspected a faceless statue in a cave, and a menu takes time to read, and I had 2 people standing 2 meters away watching my face, so I threw a rock at it, genuinely. I picked up a stone and lobbed it at the trigger, on the theory that maybe contact is contact. The statue ignored the rock with what I can only describe as contempt. Fine. I put my hand on it. 100 options opened in front of my eyes. Not 2, not a coin flip. 100 entries, each one listed with the probability it would have fired if I were a normal person. Half of them punishments, half of them gifts, running from you are stunned for 10 seconds, 31%, all the way down through the decimal places into things nobody in the history of this world has ever triggered. And 2 people were watching me stand there with my hand on a rock. I have never read anything faster in my life. I went down that list like a man defusing something, skipping every punishment, skipping the small stuff, driving for the bottom of the page where the numbers got silly, and there, at the very end, at a probability so small it barely qualified as a possibility. All of your attributes are permanently increased by 11 points, 0.001%. Take it now. What they saw was a gentle white light come down out of the statue and go into my head, and then nothing. Brother Fan, Zhangming was practically vibrating. What did you trigger? What was it? I don't know either, I said, rubbing my temple like a man with a headache. I think I gained some buffs. Buffs, he repeated flatly. Some buffs. Jiang Li looked at me for about 2 seconds longer than was comfortable, and then decided, again, not to ask. He gets buffs. I get a rock, and you get shoes, she said. You owe us dinner. The day's pay came out to 700 win for 2 gray zones, 1 statue, and 11 points to every attribute I own. I checked my panel in the car on the way back with my face very carefully arranged. Constitution 29, Strength 31. Agility 28, Spirit 27 at level 2, 3 times a normal adult across the board in a body that the system still officially classified as a beginner. And the strangest part wasn't the strength, it was the spirit. That evening at the buffet, sitting with the 2 of them while Zhang Ming made a 4th trip to the grill, I could feel an ant walking on the wall 3 meters behind my back, not hear it, not see it, feel where it was and which direction it had turned. I had to stop paying attention to it on purpose, or I'd have sat there tracking one insect through an entire dinner conversation. Then, that night, the Bureau updated its announcement and the tone had changed. The foreign criminal gang was no longer in the country. They were in Jinlin City, and in Dongjiang City specifically. They had escalated from robbery to violent assault, and the pattern analysis had turned up something the Bureau clearly hated typing out. They weren't hunting civilians, they were hunting players. Mostly at night, preferably alone, bounty attached, kill on sight authorized. I read that on my phone in a rented room with the light off, sitting on the bed with a rare blade across my knees, 3 times stronger than the average man and 2 levels above absolutely nothing. So naturally, I went into a dungeon because I had a system to feed. Barren ground, gray pebbles, 1 dead tree, and hanging off the dead tree was something with too many legs. Objective, kill the nearby poison fang spider, level 4. I turned to my teammates to divide up the work, and my teammates were a white-collar woman in office clothes and a nervous guy from the countryside on his first run. That one, I said, pointing. The woman looked where I was pointing, said, I'm terrified of spiders, and fainted straight down. No warning, no swoon, just gone, in a dungeon, in front of a level 4 boss. The country boy and I looked at each other, and then at her, and then at the spider. I gave the only useful order available. Stand still, don't run, whatever happens, do not run. Then I went and did the whole thing myself, and I did it in the pettiest way I could think of. I stacked buffs off the ground until my strength read 35, put a bullet into the spider to get its attention off the tree, and then I ran in circles, not tactically, not with a plan. I just ran a big, lazy loop around that boss at a steady 7 or 8 meters of separation, turning to fire every few strides for 3 straight minutes. Agility 28 plus a pistol with a 20% accuracy bonus plus 2 days at a shooting range had turned my marksmanship into something like a 2 and 3, and a 2 and 3 at that range over 3 minutes is a lot of bullets in a spider. It never touched me. It never got closer than 7 meters. It just chased and bled until its legs stopped working and it lay down. Level 3 plus 1 agility and a new skill, which is a big deal. Saber classes get skills the way other people get birthdays. Sprint, level 1, 12% movement speed, burns stamina. 12% doesn't sound like much. Hold that thought for about 20 minutes of story. The rewards were a rare dagger called Poison Fang. Every hit injects the spider's wrathful venom, stacking up to 10, a pair of fine cloth shoes with 15% poison resistance and 10% movement, and a box of fine bullets, because I had learned by then that ammunition is money. The office worker woke up on the way out and asked me if we'd won. 2 more days of gray zone work after that, both boring, both profitable, about 1,000 yuan total. And then I walked home at dusk down a bright, busy, ordinary street, and a manhole cover went into the air about 40 meters ahead of me. What came out of the hole was 2 meters tall with a wolf's head. It landed on a man in a business shirt and started eating him in front of 100 people. I ran towards it, unfortunately. I've thought about why, and the honest answer is that a gray zone killed 2 people I'd never met, and I've been carrying their son's grudge around since day 1. And my legs made the decision before my brain got a vote. Then it dropped the man and turned its head and looked directly at me, and it spoke. Another player from Sha Kingdom has been discovered. Broken Chinese, a thick accent. And on that wolf face, unmistakably, a human smile. The specific, cruel, delighted smile of a person who has just found the thing they came out here to find. That was the foreign criminal gang, not a monster. A werewolf player, hunting. And he was fast. Faster than the tiger, faster than the silverback, faster than anything I'd fought. And when I opened him up along the ribs, the wound closed while I was still pulling the blade back. You can't but me. Then he came at me again, and I want to note something technical because it's the moment I understood exactly how much trouble I was in. My blade has an 80% instant kill on wolf-type enemies at level 5 and under. It did not fire, not once, not on a single hit. He was above level 5, considerably, so I stopped trying to cut him apart and started trying to cut what was driving him. Tiger, regeneration is a body function. Soul damage is not a body wound. The first strike that landed after that made him scream in a completely different register. I watched the smile come off his wolf face and get replaced by simple animal arithmetic. He ran for the sewer. Sprint. 12%, remember. 12% is the difference between a man who almost catches you and a man who catches you. I got him 3 meters from the hole. He flipped over backward mid-stride to rake my throat, which was a genuinely excellent move that would have worked on almost anyone. I tilted my head about 4 inches and split him from the crown of the skull to the ground. Then I left quickly because sirens. I want to describe the street for a second because I have never been able to get it out of my head. It was 6 in the evening on a Thursday. There was a bubble tea place with a queue out the door. There was a man selling roasted sweet potatoes off a cart. There were about 200 people on that block, all of whom had spent the previous 40 seconds watching a wolf-headed thing kill a man in a business shirt, and all of whom were now watching a guy in his 20s in ordinary clothes put a sword away. Nobody screamed. That's what got me. There was no screaming at all. 200 people stood on a bright commercial street in complete silence, holding their phones, and the only sound was a bubble tea machine still running behind the counter. A woman near the front was holding a small child's face against her coat so it couldn't see. She was looking directly at me, and she said thank you in a completely normal speaking voice, the way you'd thank someone for holding a door. I have thought about that more than I've thought about the fight. The Bureau's response team arrived 4 minutes later. The man who led it wore a sword at his waist and carried a sniper rifle in his hands, and everybody called him Captain Fang. By the time they got there, the fur had receded off the corpse, and what was lying on the pavement was a young Caucasian man in his 20s. They ran him, a foreign werewolf player, estimated level 20 to 23. Captain Fang crouched by the body for a long time. At least level 30, he said finally. Melee, sword-type weapon, 1 strike, top to bottom, no hesitation, no second cut. Somebody asked him if the Bureau had anyone in the city who could do that. Even I couldn't have done that. I was like, true. The street cameras that should have caught the whole thing had been sabotaged by the werewolf's own gang before the attack, which is the only reason I got to keep my life. Captain Fang's order was to identify the man quietly, check him, and under no circumstances knock on his door. We must not force our own experts to go abroad. At that exact moment, their level 30 melee expert was in the shower in a rented room. Level 3, looking up the price of apartments in a quieter neighborhood. 2 days later, I got into a dungeon that broke my scale entirely. 5-man team. Everyone else between level 7 and 9, which meant the system had finally noticed that I was clearing content 4 levels above my head and had decided to correct the mistake with interest. Ancient courtyards, tile roofs, a walled village at the foot of a hill. Objective, eliminate all bandits attacking Qingping village. The team was a piece of work. Wang Wei, level 8, gunslinger, long coat, sniper rifle, the kind of calm that gets people killed. An assassin, level 7, in a smiling mask. A motor mouth called Li Shangyu, level 7, shooting level 2, who narrated everything, and a level 9 priest diviner in a Bureau field bodysuit carrying a folding fan and a pistol, which is a combination I still think about. And me, level 3, claiming otherwise. Wang Wei took one look at my blade and assigned me the front line. I'm the only melee here. You hold them, we shoot. Just because I'm a soldier, I have to rush in and die, I said. Real wars are long-range firefights. If the plan is that the swordsman dies first, it's not a plan, it's a schedule. That did not go over well. Within about 90 seconds, I had been quietly reclassified by the whole team as the difficult one. They stopped including me in the conversation, which suited me fine. Then 200 Bloodwolf bandits came over the ridge with torches, and the mounted 5 came ahead of them. I want to explain what mounted means in a cultivation world, because I got it wrong for the first 4 seconds. It doesn't mean cavalry, it means those 5 had trained something, and when they came off their horses, they came off them upward, a standing leap of 20 meters from a saddle over a wall into a courtyard. The first one landed on a roof and came down through the tiles onto a family's dinner table. Qingping village was maybe 300 people, farmers, a smith, a schoolmaster, and a shrine. The Bloodwolves had been squeezing them for 2 seasons and had apparently decided that this harvest they'd take the whole thing at once. Our level 9 priest diviner was the only one of us who did anything useful in the first minute. She came out into the main lane with her fan open and put a barrier over the north half of the village. A real one, a curved wall of pale light that 11 bandits ran into face first. And then she stood there holding it while people ran behind her. "How long?" Li Xiangyu was screaming from somewhere. "How long can you hold it? Longer if you shoot someone." He shot someone. Then he shot a farmer. I'm not exaggerating for effect. In the first 2 minutes of that engagement, our level 7 gunslinger with level 2 marksmanship put rounds into a melee at a range where he could not tell a bandit from a villager, and the arithmetic went the way arithmetic goes. He was cheerful about it. He kept up a running commentary the entire time. Got him, "Oh, that's a good one, watch this." And every so often somebody in a farmer's jacket went down and he'd say, "Ah," and move on to die under friendly fire. That is the tragic fate of close combat. I killed the first mounted bandit in the lane by the shrine. He was good, genuinely curved blade, real technique, and he understood distance. He opened with a feint that would have worked on me 2 weeks earlier. My hands took him apart in 4 exchanges. I felt the difference in them. Not faster, not stronger, just correct, every single time with nothing wasted anywhere. The second one watched the first one die and made a decision I respect, which was to leave. The third and fourth came at me together, and that took 11 seconds. The fifth was still standing on the wall when the boss came through the gate, and after that nobody was paying attention to the fifth. The gate did not open. It came inward in pieces, and the man who had done it walked through the gap with his hands empty, bald, scarred across the whole left side of the skull, built like a load-bearing structure. He stood in the middle of the courtyard and roared. Wang Wei's sniper round arrived in the middle of that roar and went off course as the superstakmach korism trotem. A mowas, a summon mafar tar is the CP chumari. The shot was perfect from a roof at 140 meters dead center of the forehead, and the sound coming out of that man had physical weight, and the bullet got pushed offline and struck the wall behind him. Then he covered 30 meters in a second and a half and put his fist through the roof Li Zhengyu was standing on. Our motormouth went off the far side and stopped narrating. Wang Wei got one more shot away before the boss reached him. The boss hit him hard enough to move him across 2 rooftops. I remember thinking with real regret that we had just lost our only damage. Then the priest dropped her barrier and threw a bagua array around him instead. That is a hard thing to do, and it cost her everything she had. A phantom octagon of light closed on the boss in the middle of the courtyard. He stopped, and for about 4 seconds, he could not move. The assassin in the smiling mask chose that moment beautifully. He came out of nothing directly behind the man's neck with a blade already traveling, and the boss's aura blew him off before the edge touched skin. No gesture, no counter, a pressure that came off his body like heat off a furnace door, and a level 7 assassin went into a wall 12 meters away. Then the array broke, and there was nobody left between him and the priest except me. "Tiger, I want to give you the exchange, because it is the cleanest thing I did in my first month." He threw a straight counterpunch as I came in. No wind-up, no tell, a punch that would have gone through a horse, and I did not dodge it. I put the blade into the punch. Level 8 technique means the edge arrives exactly where the fist is going, at exactly the angle that turns a man's own force against the part of him doing the forcing. His hand came apart on my sword, and his own momentum did most of the work. He was still processing that when Wrath of the Ape King rolled its 15%. Double damage mid-air with 30% penetration, and a tiger's soul riding the cut. His head came off about 4 meters above the ground, and the rest of him took 2 more steps. The village came out afterward, the way villages do, one door at a time, and then all at once. The schoolmaster tried to give me a scroll of something. An old woman tried to give me a chicken. The priest diviner sat down on the shrine steps with her fan closed and didn't say anything for a long time. I sat down about 2 meters away and also didn't say anything, which I think was the right call. Wang Wei died in that fight. I say it that way because 11 minutes later, he started calling for help from where he was lying in a perfectly good voice, with no permanent damage anywhere on him. Gunslingers at his level get a fake death skill, and he had used it the moment the boss came through the gate, and I would have gone to him out of simple team solidarity if the assassin hadn't gotten there first. I only know about that conversation because the assassin told me about it afterward, and because he was still holding the sniper rifle while he did, he'd gone invisible, walked up to the corpse that was not a corpse, and taken Wang Wei's rifle out of his hands while he was pretending to be dead, which is a genuinely funny problem to have because you cannot object without admitting you're alive. Then he stood over him and negotiated. "I'll give it back," he said pleasantly, "for your dungeon share, all of it." And if you'd like to complain to the others, please go ahead. I'm curious how you'll explain the last 11 minutes. And then, almost as an afterthought, if this dungeon hadn't been so difficult, I remember you were planning to sabotage a certain teammate and take his gear. I was the certain teammate. The order to hold the front line hadn't been laziness or contempt or bad tactics. It was step 1 of a plan he had made before saying a word to me based on nothing but a level 3 standing next to a rare grade blade. And the only reason it didn't happen is that a bald man came through a gate and rearranged everyone's priorities. Then the reward panel opened and everything I thought I knew about my own cheat got rearranged. The list wasn't equipment, it was techniques, martial arts in tiers, and there was a tier at the bottom I had never seen in my life. Excellent, 0.001%, 3 picks. I took all 3 from the same shelf. Great Dream Saber Sutra, Pure Yang True Skill, Wind Thunder Sky Treading Art. They came as 3 orbs of light that touched my forehead and went in, and what arrived wasn't a book. It was the complete inheritance. Text, diagrams, and something like footage, 10,000 corrections from 10,000 practitioners, all of it simply present in my head as if I'd always known it. And the Great Dream Saber Sutra came with an instruction that I read 3 times to make sure I understood it. You cultivate it in your sleep, you meditate, you go under, and inside the dream, you forge a second self. The experience bar that had been crawling in single digits jumped to 68 out of 100 because the system had rated that dungeon at level 10 and up, and I had done it at 3. And buried in the sutra's requirements was the sentence that reorganized my entire strategy going forward. Cultivation speed is gated by the level of your basic saber technique, that junk starter skill. The level 1, nothing every saber gets in the box. Every upgrade scroll I ever found from that day on went into it, and I never once regretted it. That night I sat cross-legged on my bed, went through the meditation, and fell asleep. And something walked out of me. I watched it happen from inside my own body, a version of me made of nothing, stepping out and away. It walked through the sofa, not around, through, then into the wall, and turned around inside the wall, and looked back at me, and raised a blade that wasn't there, and cut a gash several inches deep into the plaster of a room I was paying rent on. Great Dream Saber Sutra, level 1. The dream self has no body. Physical attacks pass through it. It deals damage both physical and spiritual. It goes wherever I send it, and everything it sees, I see. I lay there in the dark with my hands behind my head and a second me standing in the wall, and for the first time since I woke up on that wasteland, I let myself think the sentence out loud. Oh, okay, now we're playing a different game. The next dungeon put 12 of us in an underground car park, and the objective on the wall told all 12 of us exactly how our week was going. Survive 3 days in a city during a zombie apocalypse. There was a noise from the group, not panic, recognition. Everybody there had read about this one. It's the highest mortality survival dungeon on the entire forum. The reason isn't the ordinary zombies, it's that on the 3rd day, things called Corpse Kings come out and they find you, not search, find. Assassins have died in here with their stealth up because some of the special zombies see straight through it. The other 11 were all somewhere between level 10 and 13. Somebody asked me my level. 10, I said. I have told that lie in 6 different dungeons, and it has never once been questioned because nobody in this world can conceive of a reason to lie downward. We split up, which is standard. 12 people in one building is a buffet with a sign on it. I walked up out of the car park into a dead city, and the first pack of zombies saw me from about 30 meters. I got my blade halfway out of the scabbard before I realized they'd already lost interest. I stood in the middle of the street. A rotting man in a delivery uniform walked past me, close enough to brush my sleeve, and kept going. Chapter of obscurity, colluding. Non-boss, evil creatures treat you as one of their own kind and will not attack unless provoked. I had picked that thing up off a dead ghoul in a gray zone as a second choice consolation prize. It had just turned the deadliest dungeon in the game into a walking tour, so I went shopping. I'd like to describe this properly. There is a supermarket about 4 blocks from that car park, and I did a full weekly shop in it. 30 bottles of water, canned beef, several brands because I wanted options. 2 cases of instant noodles, fruit wine, 2 quilts, and a pillow from the home goods aisle. I stood in front of this shelf comparing sodium content on 2 different canned beefs while a zombie stood on the other side of the same shelf watching me with what was left of a face. "Hello," I said. It looked at me. It went back to whatever it had been doing. The one moment of tension came in the back of the store when something on the ceiling moved. A special zombie, long-necked, with limbs that bent like a gecko's, crawling upside down along the tiles. It ignored me completely and dropped on a spot near the freezer section, and there was a shout, and a player who had been standing there invisible became extremely visible. He'd come in for 1 can of salted fish. He got out with his life, barely, and I never saw him again. That was when I understood which of us was in the horror movie. I spent the rest of that first day walking around a dead city with my hands in my pockets, which is the closest thing to tourism I have done since I got here. The city had gone down fast. That's the thing you notice. Cars stopped mid-lane with the doors open and the keys still in them, a stroller on a pedestrian crossing, a restaurant with plates on every table and the menu board still lit, running off something that hadn't failed yet, a cinema with the queue barriers still up, and people, thousands of them, ambling in office clothes and school uniforms and hospital gowns, doing the slow, directionless drift that the dead in that place do all day, and every one of them ignoring me. I found 3 other players over the course of that afternoon without meaning to. The first was on a roof, 6 floors up, and he had barricaded the stairwell with everything in the building. Good position, excellent field of view, and no way down. He'd be there for 3 days. I don't know if he made it, because on day 3, the Corpse Kings don't use stairs. The second I heard before I saw a woman shouting at somebody through a door, and the somebody was not answering because there was nobody in the room and hadn't been for a while. The third one saw me first, a gunslinger on a second-floor balcony, and he put his rifle on me and tracked me for the entire length of the street. I let him, because a man who shoots at a stranger on day 1 is a man who has already worked out what day 3 looks like. I waved at him. He did not wave back, which was correct. For a base, I picked the tallest commercial tower on the street, specifically because it was so densely packed with zombies that no player in this dungeon would come within 200 meters of it. 3rd floor, corner office, the boss's one, with a glass curtain wall looking down over the main street. I wiped it down with supermarket tissues, all of it, the desk, the chairs, the glass. Then I built a bed out of 2 quilts on the sofa, opened a can of beef and a bottle of fruit wine, and sat there watching the apocalypse go by underneath me like traffic. It was, and I say this with confidence, the most comfortable zombie apocalypse in recorded history. Then I cultivated for 10 hours. That's what the sofa was for. 10 hours of dream cultivation, uninterrupted, in a building nobody would ever come to, in a world where 3 days pass in 20 minutes back home. My first dream self finished forming that night. I woke up around dark and the street below had changed. The zombie count had roughly doubled and the new arrivals were not the standard model. There was one so bloated it had trouble walking, carrying an enormous stereo speaker, and every few minutes it would stop and press at the buttons with a swollen finger, trying to turn it on. There was one with a cleaver in each hand. There was one with a chainsaw. There was one juggling a shot put, badly, over and over. There was one in military uniform holding a rifle. It clearly did not know how to use anymore. I stood at the glass with a bottle of fruit wine and watched a corpse fail to operate a boombox for 20 minutes. I want to tell you that I felt fear, but mostly I felt like I was watching a parade. Then I went to sleep with a dream self, standing guard at the office door because I'm comfortable, not stupid. Day 2, I ran an experiment. First, I sent the dream self out into the corridor. The zombies ignored it too, which was interesting because the dream self wasn't wearing the necklace. So I took the necklace off instantly, and I mean instantly. There was no delay at all. Every zombie on that floor turned toward my door and started coming. The sound of it went through the whole building like a wave. I put the pendant back on and the whole floor lost interest mid-stride, and a dozen of them wandered off down the hall like people whose phones had died. Good to know, terrifying to know. Known. Then I let the dream self clear the floor because I wanted to see it work. It's immune to physical attacks. That's not resistant. Claws and teeth and cleavers go through it like it's a projection. It walked down that corridor and killed everything on the floor and never once needed to dodge. It kept going until it ran out of the great dream power that fuels it and simply stopped existing. The next morning, I jumped out of a 3rd-story window into a crowd of zombies. They looked up, they watched me land, then they went back to what they were doing. I walked out through them and went looking for a lone elite zombie to spar with because I had 2 more days and I was bored. That was the mistake, but not for the reason you'd think. Around midday, I ran into a level 11 gunslinger, a woman, badly dehydrated, who had spent 2 days hiding in a stairwell and had run out of everything. She asked me for water. I said no. I want to be honest about this because it comes back around. I had 30 bottles. I said no anyway, because in a dungeon, the difference between a person asking for help and a person locating your supplies is a conversation you don't get to have twice. And then the mage found us. He'd introduced himself on day 1, shaped her handsome black robe, pointed hat, the whole storybook silhouette, and invited me to team up, and I declined. He turned up now with good news. He'd located a convenience store, fully stocked, guarded by only a single audio zombie. The woman went. I went too, because 30 bottles of water is not 30 days. We got to the store, and every zombie on that street locked onto me at once. Not her, not him, me. That is not possible. That has never once happened while I was wearing that pendant. My brain did the arithmetic in about a second and a half and came up with one answer. The pendant is not broken, so somebody has done something to me. I ran. Behind me, the mage clutched his head and staggered like a man having a seizure, which was theater, and the audio zombie started drumming on its speaker, and that sound has a name in the Bureau's files. 10,000 corpses come to court. Every dead thing within a kilometer called in. The woman burned her ultimate bullet time. I have seen a lot of ultimates since. Hers was the best executed thing I watched anybody do in that dungeon, and it did not matter at all. For about 40 seconds, she was untouchable. Everything slowed around her, and she moved through it, reloading mid-turn, putting rounds into the specific dead things that were closest to closing, choosing her targets in an order that made sense. She was 2 days dehydrated, and she was still doing correct work. Then the timer ended, and she was standing in the middle of a street with several hundred of them still coming, and there is no version of that math that works. I was 400 meters away by then, and running, and I could have turned around. I want to be straight with you about that because it's easy to tell this part as though there was nothing to be done. There was something to be done. It would have cost me the chapter of Obscurity's cover, revealed everything I could do to a man I already suspected, and given me maybe a 50% chance of getting us both out of a street with an audio zombie in it. I ran the numbers while I ran, and then I kept running, and the handsome mage in the black robe walked out of the middle of it without a scratch because he was never a mage. He was a necromancer. He knelt by her body, did something I didn't watch, and stood her back up with her own rifle in her hands. That's his whole operation. He hunts players for corpses, and he uses the audio zombie to make the zombies do the actual killing, so the system's punishment mechanism never fires. He doesn't murder anyone. He just arranges for the room to, which meant I couldn't touch him directly either. Kill a player who hasn't attacked you and you get a punishment level, and I'd already met one of those, so I filed it, and I waited, and the dungeon handed me a weapon on the morning of day 3. I felt it before I saw it. Dawn from my window, and there was a plume of dust and debris coming across the city in a dead straight line, going through buildings instead of around them. A corpse king, 3 meters tall, 5 meters wide, burrowing, tearing through reinforced concrete and rebar the way you tear through a wet napkin. I sent the dream self at it because the dream self is immune to physical damage. The dream self was annihilated in under a second. Fine, running it is. And I ran for most of that day, and while I was running, I learned something that changed how I thought about everything that had happened to me since the empty chest. Nobody else was being chased. I went past a window with 2 players standing in it, watching me go by with a corpse king in my wake, sipping something. I went past a rooftop with a 3rd. There were 11 other people in that city, and the thing that had come up out of the ground had come up for me specifically. It had walked past all of them to do it. The dungeon's intention to persecute me is becoming less and less disguised. Constitution 29, Strength 31, Agility 29, plus Sprint. I could run from that thing forever. I could not hurt it at all, so I found something it could hurt instead. The necromancer was on a rooftop watching my little parade with great interest. He had come to the conclusion that a running man is a tired man, and a tired man is a corpse with an appointment. He sent the raised assassin at me, invisible, and the gunner corpse to cut me off. He did not know about my second dream self, which was 3 streets away, standing inside a wall, watching him, so I turned off the main road, and then I started steering. I want to be clear that this took the better part of an hour, and it was the most delicate work I have ever done. A corpse king doesn't follow a scent, it follows me, so every turn I took, it took. I ran a route, I chose corners, I doubled back through a shopping arcade, and the whole time, through the eyes of a clone phasing through walls a quarter mile away, I watched exactly where the necromancer was standing. I bent my path around him like water finding a drain. His assassin ambushed me halfway through from behind a door, invisible. I cut it in half before the door was fully open. Do you think my 27 points of spiritual attribute are decorative? I don't need to see a man to know he's holding his breath. The necromancer figured out what was happening at about the 2/3 mark. I know this because he started running, and he ran well. He lasted maybe 4 more minutes before a body that had spent 3 days standing on rooftops giving orders ran out of the thing my body had spent a week building at a shooting range. The corpse king went through the building he was standing in. I don't think it ever knew he was there. That's the part I keep coming back to. He wasn't killed. He was passed through, the way a car passes through a moth. That night, 5 more corpse kings woke up. I sat on a rooftop at the edge of the city with a bottle of water and watched them because at that point there was nothing else to do. One of them was 100 meters tall and thin as a crane. It picked up an office block and turned it over in its hands like a kid with a toy it didn't know the rules for. One had multiple heads and wings and went over the skyline, raining fire and something that ate through steel. and one just made a sound, a low rolling sound, and every ordinary zombie that heard it swelled to several times its size and went berserk and started tearing apart the other zombies until whole districts of the dead were killing each other in the dark. 3 days done, level 4 plus 1 constitution, and then the reward list opened, and it had an excellent tier in it. 3 picks. First, the Sublimator, a mutation potion, excellent grade, which came in a squat glass bottle and tasted like a 9-volt battery. What it gave me was called a Bioforce Field, a passive, always-on layer that reflects melee attacks and deflects incoming projectiles up to and including grenade launcher class at the cost of stamina. I tested it the same night I got home by picking up chunks of broken concrete and throwing them at myself as hard as I could. They never touched me. Every single one got flung away about 6 inches from my skin at speed in a direction I did not choose, which is how I learned to test that indoors and not near windows. Second, George's magical sound system. That is the item's actual name. It's a speaker, roughly the size of a bread roll. It has tracks on it, and the first track played at maximum volume does this: plus 33 to every attribute I own, plus 20% damage reduction, level 10 life recovery, immunity to all negative effects for 1 minute, 3 times a day. I want to say something about the great unknowable being that designs these rewards. I have complained about it repeatedly in this story, but whoever put a War God pill inside a Bluetooth speaker and named it after a guy called George, I'd buy that being a drink. Third, the Endless Series Sniper Rifle. Excellent. The magazine can't be removed, which sounds like a flaw right up until you read the next line, which is that it refills itself at 1 round every 3 seconds forever. Effective range 5,300 meters. Penetrates 160 millimeters of steel, and the scope is an X-ray. It sees through 20 meters of solid matter, and it locks on. Constitution 39, Spirit 36. 3 days in there had cost me 20 minutes out here. I put the rifle in my storage, put the speaker in my pocket, and went to tell Zhongli I was quitting the temp job. I'd already made the decision. 700 weighing a day is a rounding error when you're carrying excellent grade equipment, and the gray zones around Dongjiang had stopped producing anything worth the drive. But I worked one last day anyway, because telling someone you're quitting over the phone and then not showing up for the shift you already agreed to isn't my style, and because I wanted to buy her lunch. Zhang Ming didn't come in that morning. Zhang Li called him twice from the car, then she called him from the site, then she stopped calling and started driving, and neither of us said anything about it because kids that age miss shifts, and there are 11 boring explanations for a phone going to voicemail. We did 4 zones that day, which is a brutal number. The last one was at night in a lake, not by a lake, in one. The zone had opened underwater, and the water inside it had gone somewhere else, so we were standing on a wet lake bed with a wall of held back lake on either side, killing things with too many arms in a fog that smelled like a fish market in August. And while we were standing in it, it solidified. The sky went black, not dark, black, the way a screen goes black, and the ground under my boots changed texture, and where the lake had been, there was now a river channel, brand new, 100 meters of moving water between us and the shore we'd walked in on. It's set, Zhang Li said. I asked her what that actually meant, and she told me, and it's the single most frightening thing anybody has explained to me in this world. A solidified gray zone cannot be destroyed. Not is hard to destroy. Cannot. You can shell it, you can burn it, you can drop the biggest thing your country owns on it, and within 2 seconds, every stone and every tree and every monster inside it restores to exactly what it was. Forever. The only thing that works is players going in, killing the monsters by hand, and that doesn't fix it either. That buys about a week before the population comes back. And here's the part that made me put my hand on my blade. An unsolidified zone drops rewards. A solidified one drops nothing, ever, to anyone. So the ones that pay are the ones you can still save, and the ones that are lowest are the ones you have to keep clearing for free, forever, or they spread. If the real world were ever full of solidified gray zones, she said, looking at the black sky, humanity would be nearing its end. Then she looked at the 100 meters of new river between us and the car and mentioned that she couldn't swim. So I carried her across, one arm around her, one arm doing the work in a current that had not existed 20 minutes earlier in the dark, with my boots full of somebody else's lake. If it really doesn't work, I told her, about a third of the way, you and I will sink into the river together. Absolutely fair. That is the worst reassurance I have ever heard in my life. I'm a saber. We're not known for our words. We got out, both of us. We sat on the bank and laughed like idiots for about a minute, and then we drove back into a city where the national broadcast had just started. Every screen, the train station, the storefronts, the bus we transferred to, Shaw Kingdom was going fully public with the player system. No more forums on the dark web, no more pretending gray zones where gas leaks. Class cards would be issued free to anyone who qualified. Starting salary for a registered player, $20,000 a month. The whole bus was talking at once. A guy behind me was already calling his brother. The woman across the aisle was crying, and I couldn't tell which kind. I sat there with an excellent grade sniper rifle in a pocket dimension the size of a bathroom and thought about how many people were going to sign up for this by Friday, and how many of them thought $20,000 a month was the important number in that broadcast. The next morning, Zhang Li called me. Zhang Ming had gone into a dungeon on his day off. He hadn't come out. That's the whole report. That's all the report ever is. The Bureau doesn't get a body or a location or a last message or a name for the thing that did it. A player enters and the system either returns him or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, there is nowhere to send flowers. 17 years old, sunglasses indoors, a meter of rifle he was too skinny to carry properly, a pair of ordinary cloth shoes that a faceless goddess in a cave gave him, that he wore anyway, that he told us were comfortable. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while with the phone still in my hand. Swipe bite. Just think of Zhang Ming as having gone to heaven early. I said that out loud to an empty room because it was the only sentence available that wasn't a scream. It didn't help. I don't think it was supposed to. 2,139 players confirmed dead last month. I'd read that number on a forum and thought about it for 4 seconds and gone to bed. He was one of them now. He'd been one of them the whole time. That's what a number is. It's a room full of aliaos, and I'd skimmed past it on my way to the equipment listings. Zhang Li called me again that evening. She'd been to the bureau office. She'd asked which dungeon, and they'd told her they don't have that information because nobody does. A dungeon isn't a place with an address. She'd asked whether there was anyone to notify. There was, an aunt in another province, and the bureau had a form for it, and the form had been filed that afternoon by an administrator who had filed 9 others the same week. Then she said the thing that I have carried around since. He asked me on Tuesday whether he should save up for a better rifle or a better scope. What did you tell him? Scope. Long silence on the line. I told him scope, and he saved up. He had it in his hand when he went in, and it didn't matter at all. I didn't have anything to say to that. There isn't anything. I stayed on the phone with her for about 40 minutes, and most of it was quiet, and at some point she stopped crying and started making a plan about the funeral flowers because that is what she does. She finds a task and stands in front of it. Before she hung up, she said one more thing. Don't go into a dungeon tomorrow. Okay, I didn't go into a dungeon for 2 days after that. On the 3rd day I did, because the alternative was to sit in that room and get better at nothing, and because the last useful thing anyone ever said to me about grief in my old life was that you can't outrun it, but you can absolutely outwork it for a while. The dungeon I got put me on the side of a mountain. 1,000 meters of snow and black rock, wind coming down the face hard enough to lean on, and a stone path going up into cloud. Objective: ascend the mountain path and complete the Dragon Peak trial. My teammates were the richest people I had met in this world. The leader was a level 19 Beastmaster in a full-length leather coat, chain-smoking in a blizzard, who had 4 summons out at once, a grizzly the size of a van, a golden eagle with a 4-meter span, a green viper 20 meters long, and a turtle you could park a truck on. He offered me 8 million yuan for any rare-grade pet I might be holding, and when I raised an eyebrow at the number, he clarified, anything under 100 million is a small matter. There was a level 17 gunslinger and a level 18 female saber in black who looked at my blade with actual professional interest and then, mercifully, said nothing. I told them I was level 15. 12 levels of lie, and it went down like water. On the way up, the Beastmaster explained the trial because he'd read every thread about it, and because a man like that does not enjoy silence. Some parties get 1 dragon. That's the standard outcome, and it kills about half of them. Some parties get 2, and those are the runs that produce the equipment you see in the display cases on Tianhua Street. There are 3 confirmed accounts of 3 dragons in the entire history of the forum, and every single person who walked out of those is a name, the kind of name that gets invited to things. Nobody, he said, tapping ash into a blizzard, has ever heard of 4. What decides it? He shrugged inside his enormous coat. Party strength. The mountain measures you on the way up. That's the whole point of the path. It isn't a walk, it's an assessment. I thought about that for the next 400 meters and did not enjoy it. The saber in black walked beside me for a stretch of it. She had a long straight blade across her back, wrapped. She moved on that ice like somebody who had done a lot of walking on bad ground. Level 15, she said, not a question. That's right. She looked ahead for a while. Where'd you get the sword? Wolf dungeon, first run. She said again and left it alone, and I have never been more grateful to a stranger in my life. The Beastmaster kept his summons out the whole climb, which is enormously expensive and which he did purely because he could. The grizzly broke trail. The viper coiled around the packs. The turtle came up the path behind us at its own pace like a piece of slow-moving architecture, and the golden eagle went up and out and circled, scouting 400 meters over our heads. It was the eagle that found the first problem, and it found it by dying. Something came out of the rock face and took it out of the air, and the Beastmaster went down on one knee in the snow with his hand over his eyes and said a word I won't repeat. About 2/3 of the way up, I stopped, jumped 10 meters straight onto a cliff shelf, and pulled a 2-meter black rifle out of thin air. What, said the gunslinger, is that? 4 archer dragon guardians were waiting for us in a nest carved into the rock, armored, bow-armed, positioned to cover the whole last stretch of the path, and sitting behind about 6 meters of solid mountain, which is a good place to be unless somebody in your kill zone is carrying an X-ray scope. I could see all 4 of them through the stone, not shapes. Outlines, postures, the direction each of them was facing, lock on, fire. It was as simple as playing whack-a-mole, except the moles were inside the ground, and I never once had to look at one with my eyes. 4 shots, 4 hits, through 6 meters of mountain, and 160 millimeters of steel penetration means that through 6 meters of mountain is a sentence about the mountain, not about the rifle. Then an armored dragon guard came up the path at us at 100 meters, and I removed its upper body. Nobody said anything for a while after that. The Beastmaster stopped chain smoking for a full minute, which for him was the equivalent of a formal statement, and then he lit another one and asked me very carefully whether I had considered selling it. No, I could go quite high. I know. The summit was a broad flat plateau of black stone swept clean by the wind, and in the middle of it there was a magic array carved directly into the rock, a circle about 40 meters across, with channels cut into the stone in a pattern I couldn't read. The channels lit up as we stepped onto the plateau. The Beastmaster had been talking. He stopped mid-word. I watched the color go out of his face in real time from the top down like water draining out of a glass. It's 4-colored. I looked at the array. 1/4 of the channels had come up sickly yellow-green, 1/4 red, 1/4 white-blue, 1/4 a flickering violet that made my teeth hurt. That's bad. That's not bad, he said in a voice I had not heard him use. There's no rating for that. There's no thread for that. Nobody has ever. 4 horizons, 4 shapes coming in over 4 different edges of the world, and every single one of them over 100 meters long. The poison one arrived first, and the sky above us went yellow-green from side to side. The frost one came in second, and the air stopped being air. I have been cold. That was not cold. That was the temperature at which the moisture in a breath turns into something that cuts on the way out. The lightning one made the entire mountaintop hum, a note you felt in the fillings of your teeth, and every hair on every living thing up there stood straight up. The fire one just blotted out one side of the sky. The Beastmaster did the right thing. I want that on the record because I only knew him for 2 hours and he spent most of it being insufferable, and when it came to it, he did the right thing without being told. He threw everything he had between us and the array, grizzly forward, viper up, turtle down as a wall, and shouted one word at the 2 of us, and the word was run. 3 seconds. That's how long the rest of my team lasted. 3 seconds for a level 19 Beastmaster, a level 17 gunslinger, a level 18 saber who asked me where I got my sword and then let it go, and 4 summons that cost more than a house. I was already moving when it happened, and the only reason I'm here is the bioforce field, which ate the edge of the first breath and about half of my stamina in the same instant and dumped me 20 meters into a drift. I lay in that snowbank with 4 ancient dragons circling above me, and I said the only thing there was to say, "Dungeon, you're ruthless." Then I got my breath back. At worst, it's just death. If you can't kill me this time, you'll be the one to lose. Here is what I could not do. Fight a 100-meter dragon. Here's what I could do. Shoot something in the eye from 3,000 meters through a mountain. So I stopped thinking of it as a fight and started thinking of it as a job. The poison dragon was first because it was lowest. I dug into the drift until only the barrel showed, waited for it to bank, and put a round through its left eye at 3 kilometers. The sound it made moved snow off the ridge above me. I moved before the second shot because a 5,000-meter rifle is only an advantage until somebody works out where the noise comes from. Second position, second eye. Then it did the thing that furious, enormous animals do, which is throw its head back and roar at the sky with its mouth wide open. I put 4 rounds straight down its throat, blind and bleeding internally, and it had been about 90 seconds. The other 3 came looking, and this is where it got genuinely difficult because a dragon that can't see is a problem, and 3 dragons that can see are a math error. I used the dream self as bait. It walks, it looks exactly like me, and physical attacks pass through it, so I'd send it sprinting across open snow and let a 100-meter frost dragon smash a crater where it stood while I worked from somewhere else entirely. The ice dragon caught on fastest, and the way it caught on frightened me more than anything it did with its jaws. It stopped attacking the decoy. It started attacking the ground around the decoy, wide, indiscriminate, freezing whole hectares of the plateau at a time, on the working theory that whatever was casting that thing had to be standing somewhere inside the radius. It was right, twice. The first time, my bio-force field ate a wall of frost that would have gone through a bunker. I lost a third of my stamina in 1 second and had to lie in a crevice for 4 minutes doing nothing at all. The second time, I got a boot frozen to the rock and had to leave part of the soul behind. Somewhere in there, I also learned that the Thunder Dragon didn't need to see me to find me because 112 kilos of steel in a magnetic storm is a fairly loud object, and every time I brought the rifle up, it knew roughly where to look. So I started firing from inside snowdrifts and moving before the sound arrived. Fire, roll, dig, wait, fire. That is the whole shape of the middle of that fight. It lasted somewhere between 4 and 6 hours, and nothing about it was heroic. It was a man in a hole with a rifle against 4 animals the size of city blocks, doing arithmetic about wind speed and stamina regeneration, eating snow because he'd run out of water. When all 3 of them finally converged on the same slope at the same time, which is what I'd been spending 6 hours arranging, I reached into my pocket and turned the speaker on. Track 1, maximum volume, plus 33 to every attribute. My numbers, at that point, sat in the 40s. They went to the high 70s and 80s across the board. Agility 62, and the world slowed down around me like somebody had adjusted the frame rate. I got the ice dragon's eyes in that minute. Both of them, one from the ground and one from the air off a ledge, blind firing at a moving target the size of a building by feel and by the whining of the wind off its scales. I got one of the Thunder Dragons. Then the minute ended, and I came down out of it like a man stepping off a treadmill. I was out of ammunition in the middle of a mountaintop with 3 enraged blind things and 1 that could still see. The Thunder Dragon had me between a rock spur and a drop, front and back sealed, and its mouth came down, so I stepped on it. I ran up the incoming jaw, planted a foot on the ridge of its skull, and put the Wolf Slayer blade through its remaining eye. Then it whipped its head, and I went into the mountainside like a cannonball. I'm told the human body can survive that. Mine did mostly, and I'd like to formally thank the Iron Mountain Belt, the unyielding ring, and whatever's left of the wolfskin armor's dignity. The Flame Dragon was the smart one. Once its 3 siblings were blind, it stopped engaging at all. It went high, 500 meters, out of my visual reach in the cloud, and started using the blind ones as cover, waiting for me to commit to one of them so it could come down on my back. So I gave it what it wanted. I let myself get slow. I let my breathing get ragged in the open. I limped badly, out onto the snowfield in front of the poison dragon. I made it look like a man who had reached the end of his supply of ideas. Then I put the scope up into the cloud, found the heat of it through the water vapor, locked and fired. It came down through the cloud to kill me, and I went up its side and got aboard. I anchored the Wolf Slayer blade into the scale ridge above its skull, jammed it in like a piton, 40% armor penetration, and held on with both hands while 100 meters of furious animal tried to shake a man off its head at 400 kilometers an hour. Then one-handed, I put the poison fang dagger into the socket I just ruined and stacked the spider venom to 10. It landed hard. I amputated a wing at the joint on the way past. That was the last of the 4, and killing the cripples afterward took me until nightfall. I finished that dungeon burned down one side, electrocuted through the other, with frostbite in 3 fingers, and a broken something in my back, sitting in the snow between rounds, eating cold canned beef out of a tin with the blade of my dagger, because at some point in that fight, I had crossed from heroism into shift work. Level 5. New skill, flow state, plus 15% physical penetration, 8% chance of double damage, and a title, which is a thing I didn't know existed. Dragon Slayer, peak, plus 12% to all damage permanently for the rest of my life. Then the reward list opened, and it started at rare. Not included rare, started there. Dragon eggs, live young dragons, dragon scale armors, dragon bone blades. I scrolled past millions of Wayne worth of things without stopping, because at the bottom of the list, in a tier I had heard of exactly once, from a receptionist on Tianhua Street who was laughing at me, Epic, 0.1%. Essence of the Dragon Source. Randomly awakens 1 Dragon Source power at the level of an ancient dragon. Random. Could be any of the 4. Could be something worse. I took it anyway because there is a certain kind of door you only get shown once. Second pick, the Thunder Dragon Blade. Excellent. 60% armor penetration. Chain lightning out to 160 meters. 3 seconds of paralysis on hit E. And an active called Thunder Flash plus 200% to all of my speeds for 60 seconds 3 times a day. Third pick, an all-skill upgrade scroll. Excellent. Plus 4 levels to every skill I own, up to a cap of 8. Then I took the crystal out and held it, and it soaked into my palm like water into sand, and I was somewhere else. A frozen plateau under a white sky, going on past the curve of the world. Hail coming down onto the surface of a lake and leaving no mark at all because the lake was not water anymore and had not been for a very long time. And scattered across the ice, mighty beasts, enormous ancient things, frozen mid-stride, mid-roar, mid-leap, held exactly where they had been standing when the cold arrived, not killed, interrupted. When I came back to myself, I was kneeling in the snow on Dragon Peak with my hand out, and the wind had stopped because everything within 100 meters of me had frozen solid, including the wind, the source of ice power, absolute zero, created out of nothing, controlled at will, out to 10 kilometers in every direction. I stood up on a mountaintop full of dead dragons and did the honest accounting: a rare blade, a tiger's soul, a brass pentagram, a belt, a ring, bracers, gauntlets. Bioforce field, sound system, sniper rifle, thunderblade, 10 years of swordsmanship in my hands and 3 excellent martial arts in my head. This one power surpassed the sum of all of it. The money took a while to catch up to the power, and honestly that gap is most of what happened next. 7.88 million in the bank, which sounds like a lot and is not enough for a house in Dongjiang with a garden. So I took the Poison Fang dagger to Jinlin City and sold it for 2.1 million to a buyer who went invisible in the middle of the negotiation to see what I'd do. I kept eating my noodles. He reappeared, apologized, and paid full price because a man who doesn't flinch when an assassin vanishes at his table is a man you pay full price. On the high-speed train home, we stopped in the middle of nowhere, then gunfire outside. Dozens of red-skinned two-horned things had come up onto the tracks out of a solidified zone, and 3 very young players were down there in the gravel fighting them and losing. I could hear one of them shouting instructions that weren't working. I was 400 meters away in a window seat, eating instant noodles. I put the cup down, looked out the window, and froze every single one of them where it stood, and then let the ice go, and the whole thing came apart into glittering dust and blew off the rails in about 1 second. The 3 players stood on empty track and turned in a slow circle, looking for the person who had done it. I picked my noodles back up, then I did the least glamorous and most important shopping trip of my career. 500,000 yuan for 30 excellent grade warrior upgrade scrolls, bought in bulk from a dealer who thought I was an idiot. 4 of them pushed basic saber technique from level 3 to level 4. 8 more went into flow state. 14 went into sprint. Then I burned the all-skill scroll on top of the whole pile. Everything to level 8. Sprint at level 8 is plus 48% movement speed. Flow state at level 8 is 30% penetration and a 25% chance of double damage. So, on top of the blades 60, on top of Wrath of the Ape Kings 15. I had spent 500,000 yuan on a starter skill that every saber gets for free and throws away, and then the coal boss called. That was the buyer I'd been talking to about a rare grade item, an old money type, all bluster and provincial charm, and at the last minute he moved our meeting from a hotel lobby to a derelict factory in the suburbs at night. I went anyway, on purpose. I walked into the alley and there were 4 gun barrels on me, 2 in front, 2 behind, and a hard 30-something in a leather jacket stepped out of the dark to explain my situation to me. You'll just become one of the most unremarkable names on the missing players list, so I gave him the performance of a lifetime. This is an illegal criminal act, I said with my hands up and my voice cracking beautifully. Aren't you afraid of legal retribution? I did the whole thing, the stammer, the appeal to authority, the bit where I offered to just give them the item and go home. I played a fresh graduate who had made one very bad decision about a business meeting. I played it for a full 3 minutes. It was some of my finest work, while, one by one, their hands stopped working. They didn't notice at first. That's the thing about absolute zero when you apply it slowly and from the inside. There's no frost, no visible cloud, no dramatic crackle. A finger just doesn't move when the brain tells it to. Then a wrist, then a shoulder. One of them tried to work the slide on a jammed pistol and couldn't close his fist. The leader reached over and grabbed his own man by the arm to shove him forward and found that the man was cold all the way through. He turned to run and went down on legs that had stopped taking instructions. We had about 15 minutes of business negotiation after that. He talked mostly. He had a lot to say about a missing players list, and about who else had been on it, and about where the rare grade firearm in his coat had come from, which was off a player they had murdered in this exact alley using this exact method 3 months earlier. I walked out of that alley alone. In the corners where 5 men had been standing, there was ice crystal dust. Not a lot of it. About as much as you'd expect 5 men to come to. I would like to tell you that I felt something about that. I felt like a man who had just found out that the alley he was standing in had a body count before he arrived. The next dungeon dropped me into a forest with an objective that was, on paper, the easiest thing I'd been asked to do in weeks. Find and eliminate a crazy Trent. Level 6. Level 6. I'd killed 4 ancient dragons in my last outing. I stood there reading that line twice, waiting for the rest of it to appear. Then I turned around and met my team. The first was a boy in a wheelchair, 13, maybe 14, thin the way sick kids are thin, with a blanket over his knees in a forest in warm weather, and a pistol resting on top of the blanket because his hands were the only part of him that worked reliably. The second was a bald man in his 60s in a red vest, black shorts, and slippers, carrying a machete like he'd come out to trim a hedge. "What's the mission?" the old man asked. I pointed at the glowing line of text hanging in the air 3 feet in front of his face. He squinted at it. "Ah, my presbyopia." Now, I want you to note that because it comes back, but at the time it barely registered because I was busy having a quiet crisis about the kid. He introduced himself politely. He explained without any drama at all that he had high paraplegia and leukemia, that the doctors had given him about a month, and that he had bought a player class card with his own money. Then he volunteered to be the bait. "I'm the slowest and I can't dodge," he said perfectly reasonably, "so I'm the most efficient way to make it commit. I will fulfill the duties a team member should have. I have been ordered to tank by a level 8 sniper, a level 3 mage, and a man in a black trench coat with a gun in my face. I said no to all of them. A 14-year-old with a month to live asked to do it politely, and I nearly lost the thread of the entire mission. Nobody's bait. I said, stay in the middle, shoot anything I point at." Then we searched that forest for 4 hours, because here's the joke the dungeon was telling. There were hundreds of Trents in there. Hundreds. 20 meters tall, indistinguishable, standing in rows, all of them entirely inert, and exactly one of them was crazy, and the mission text did not say which. We walked in circles under enormous silent trees for most of a day. The old man complained about his knees. The kid ran the map on his phone and kept a grid. I got increasingly certain that this was not an accident. Around hour 3, we found 2 human skeletons in the leaf litter. Modern fabric, boots with rubber soles, 2 dead players some time ago. And that's where the kid in the wheelchair solved the dungeon. 2, he said. 2 what? 2 skeletons. There were 3 of them, and there are 3 of us. Every team here is 3. He looked up at me, and his eyes were doing the thing that eyes do when someone is enjoying themselves for the first time in a long while, which means one of the 3 survived, or he looked very deliberately at the old man in the slippers who was 40 meters off poking at a stump. "Brother Chen, he said he couldn't read the mission text." And everyone can read the mission text. It's not written on a sign. It's put directly into a player's mind. There is no such thing as being too far-sighted to read it. We found the old man 20 minutes later in a clearing, building a bonfire the size of a house out of deadwood he'd dragged into a pile, drilling a stick against a board to get a spark. "What are you doing?" "The holy fire," he said, beaming at me. "The whole forest, all of it, purified." I froze his left arm, lightly, a test just enough to lock the joint. Human bodies are mostly water, and it distributes in a specific way when it crystallizes. I know because I'd been practicing. His didn't. The water inside that man was arranged wrong. I froze the rest of him and took him apart with the flat of the blade, and the forest around us went completely still in a way that ordinary forests don't. Then the reward panel opened, and I looked at the top tier, and I started laughing. Rare. That was the ceiling. The best thing on that entire list was rare grade A, the tier I'd been outgrowing since my second week. Do you understand what that means? The dungeon had stopped trying to kill me. 4 ancient dragons hadn't done it, so it had switched strategies, and its new strategy was to waste my afternoon, sending me on a 4-hour scavenger hunt for a bald man in slippers and paying me in pocket change is not an attempt on my life. It's spite. Petty, I said out loud, to nobody in an empty forest. That's genuinely petty. I took the Madtreant mask, which is a rare grade item and one of the 3 most useful things I own. It disguises me as any entity within 25% of my own size, not a hologram, a full disguise, appearance and build, and critically, voice. Only a level 10 detection skill can see through it, and detection at that level is rarer than the mask. There's a mental side effect at low spirit. At 30 spirit, it vanishes completely, and I had 36, and on the way out, I got the kid's name. Lin Hao, second son of the Chen Group, which is a name you see on the side of buildings in Dongjiang. He also, it turned out, ran a video series on C Station called My Player Diary, in which a boy in a wheelchair films himself going into dungeons. The comment section had decided he was a liar. Every episode, thousands of people patiently explaining to a dying 14-year-old that a paraplegic can't be a player and that the wheelchair was a prop for views. His class is priest. He bought the card to try to heal himself. That was the whole plan, the entire strategy of a kid with a month left. And it hadn't worked because a level 1 priest can close a cut, and leukemia is not a cut. So he kept going into dungeons anyway, and he carried a pistol so that he wouldn't be deadweight on somebody else's team. His parents and his older brother paid for the best specialists in the country. None of the three of them had been home in months. And here's the thing that made me sit down. High-level priests essentially do not exist in this world. Not because the class is weak, because nobody chooses it. Every player has exactly one life, and healing somebody else does not extend yours. So out of every 100 people who awaken, roughly 0 decide to become the medic. The priest is a hidden class, not because it's secret, but because it's unwanted, which is why, when I put a priest class ring from the Ape King set up for sale, exactly one buyer in the entire country responded, and the offer was 6 million yuan, and the meeting was at the Wansheng Grand Hotel, which the Chen family owns. He came into that meeting room in his chair, saw me, and stopped dead. You calm, Brother Chen. Now, what I did next was calculated, and I want to be honest about the calculation, because if I dress it up as kindness, I'm lying to you. I had 22 Heavenly Origin pills, excellent grade, given to me by an NPC in a world I'll get to in a minute. I had no idea what they do to a human being with a terminal illness. I had a very clear idea of what the Chen Group could pay if they worked. I fleeced them. That was the plan. I want that on the record. Open your mouth. What is Lin Hao? Open your mouth. He did, because he was 14 and I was the guy who'd cut a crazy Trent in half in front of him. Then we waited. 2 minutes of nothing. The old butler, Uncle Wu, standing by the door with his hands folded, watching me the way you watch a man who has just given the young master an unlabeled pill. 3 minutes. Then Lin Hao's whole body jerked. My legs. He grabbed the arms of the chair. My legs seem to have feeling. They're so numb. Uncle Wu, they're numb. Uncle Wu crossed that room faster than I have ever seen a man in his 70s move, dropped to his knees and tapped the boy's shin with 2 fingers. Young master. Can you feel that? Yes. The old man put his forehead against the arm of the wheelchair and started crying, silently, the way people cry when they've been holding something for years. Then Lin Hao started trying to stand. I want to give you the whole 3 minutes because it took 3 minutes and I have never watched anything harder in my life. He got his hands on the armrests, he got his weight forward, his legs, which had not carried him since he was small, folded twice, and both times he caught himself on the chair and said, no, wait, I've got it. To nobody, to the room, to himself. The third time he came up onto his feet and stayed there, shaking, gripping the back of a chair with both hands, and he said one sentence over and over, and he could not stop saying it. I'm standing. Uncle Wu, I'm standing. By evening, he was walking, slowly, with a hand on the wall, up and down a corridor of the Wansheng Grand Hotel, laughing at nothing. The leukemia was more than half gone by the morning blood panel. His myopia had also been cured, incidentally, as a side effect, which is the single funniest detail in this entire story. He got out of a wheelchair and threw away his glasses on the same day. His father flew back that night. He didn't thank me first. He walked in, looked at his son walking, sat down across from me, and asked what the price was. I said 50 million. Lin Elder looked at me for a long moment. Xiaorui is worth more than that, he said. Requote. Then he had Uncle Wu bring in a rosewood box and opened it, and inside were the property deeds to about 30 pieces of Dongjiang real estate, and he told me to pick. I took the Dongcheng Villa, 888 square meters, walled garden, swimming pool, 3 floors. He added 1% of the Chen Group's dividend shares on top, unprompted, because he clearly felt 50 million had been an insulting number and wanted the matter settled properly. I bought a BMW that evening. On the way to my new address, I drove it through the gates of a mansion with a garden. I said the words out loud in the empty driveway because there was nobody around to hear me be ridiculous. Successful people, peak residence. Charming courtyard. 6 weeks earlier, I had been lying on a wasteland next to an empty box. Lin Hao posted an episode of My Player Diary 4 days later. He didn't announce anything. He didn't explain. He set the camera up in the hotel corridor at the same height he'd always filmed at, which was wheelchair height. And then he walked into frame and sat down on the floor in front of it and said hello. The comment section broke. Is quote I read it that night, all of it, scrolling on my phone in a house with a garden. 2 years of people telling a kid he was a fraud, and then 11,000 comments in one evening, and about a third of them were apologies. Actual ones, long ones. People typing out in public under their own account names that they had spent a year mocking a child in a wheelchair for pretending, and that they were sorry, he answered, nearly all of them. Individually, it took him 2 days. There was one comment near the top that I have thought about since. Somebody wrote, "So who healed you?" And he wrote back, "A saber." Just that, 2 words. And underneath it, 400 replies of people explaining to each other that this was obviously a joke because sabers can't heal, because sabers can't do anything, because everybody knows what a saber is. Jiang Li came to see the villa that weekend and stood in the doorway of a 3-story mansion with her hands in her jacket pockets. "You bought this." "It was given to me." "By who?" "A grateful man." She looked at the pool. She looked at the garden. She looked at me, standing in a house that a level 5 saber with a bureau file and no employment history had no business standing in. "Okay," she said, and that was it. That's all she ever said about it, and I have never in my life been so relieved by a single word. The first thing I did in that house was walk into the master bedroom, open the rosewood wardrobe, push the hanging clothes aside, and install a door to another dimension. The mysterious chaos, secret realm, excellent grade. You fix its entrance to a physical location, and what appears is a hazy yellow doorway that only I can see and only I can open. Behind the coats, inside, about 1,000 cubic meters of featureless yellow void. No floor, no ceiling, no horizon, and a faint constant trembling in the air like the inside of a struck bell. What it does, plus 120% cultivation speed to every skill I own, a slow permanent rise to all my attributes, up to a cap of plus 30, and the line I read 4 times, it can awaken talents. One night in there, all attributes plus 3, and the Great Dream Saber Sutra hit level 2, which unlocked Dream Bloom Saber Art, an area technique that puts out saber light doing both physical and spiritual damage at once. Constitution 52, Spirit 49. A few nights after that, the realm woke something up in me on its own. Indestructible body, level 4, 12% damage reduction, and skin that ordinary blades simply do not cut. I had a mansion, a car, a monster in my tattoo, a god's cold in my hands, and a private universe in my closet. And the very next dungeon I entered, 15 people walked out on me, 18 players, everyone between level 14 and 19 on paper, and I say on paper because 3 of us were lying. I said I was level 16. Zhang Li, who had gone up fast and had been pulled onto the same run by the same matching system that had put a wheelchair kid in a Trent forest, inflated hers by a few, and Lin Hao, walking on his own legs in his own shoes, said a number that was frankly generous. We came out in a mountain valley under a sky that had 2 moons in it. Objective: assist the Wuji sect in eliminating all invading enemies. Behind us, up a long flight of stone stairs cut into the mountainside were the gates of a cultivation sect, banners, tile roofs, several hundred disciples in gray robes forming up in the courtyard with swords. In front of us, coming over the ridge, was a ship made of bone. About 300 meters of it, floating, blotting out one of the moons, with vents in the shape of skulls along the flanks streaming blood-red gas down onto the valley floor. There were over 1,000 demonic cultivators standing on its decks and hanging off its rigging, and the sound they made was not a battle cry, it was laughter. And then the smartest player in our group said the thing that broke us apart: "We can just leave." He was right. That's what made it so effective. The dungeon had put us at the bottom of a mountain, and the mountain had a path down it, and the path went to a city about 8 li away that was not part of the objective at all. Nothing in the rules said we had to fight. Nothing physically stopped us walking. 15 of them walked. I watched them go, not running, walking, in a group, chatting, glancing back over their shoulders at the bone ship the way you'd look at bad weather you decided to sit out. They got to the city and found a rooftop and settled in to watch. And here is what the Bureau's own training material says about that, which every one of them had read and none of them had believed. A player who abandons a dungeon objective doesn't get sent home when the timer ends. The dungeon closes without him. He stays in that world permanently. And in a later cycle, when the system builds the next version of that dungeon for the next group of players, it takes the ones who stayed behind and sets them as an objective. They think they're waiting it out. They're being inventoried. I turned to the 2 who hadn't moved. "Both of you should go up the mountain. Get behind the sect wall." "No," Lin Hao said. He had his pistol out and his hands were shaking, and he did not move a centimeter. "I'm a person who's going to die anyway. Everything from here is extra. I'm not spending the extra hiding." And Zhang Li, who could have walked to that city with 15 other people and been perfectly safe, and who had known me for exactly as long as it takes to survive one bus ride, put her ghost up beside her and said, I won't abandon my friends, so that's what we had. A dying kid, a summoner, and me, at the bottom of a mountain against a bone ship. The Wuji sect's leader was a man named Chen Haoran. He opened the battle by launching himself 200 meters straight up into the air, wrapped in golden light, and going into the ship alone. I liked him immediately. Then the demonic cultivators came down off the ship like rain, and I did something that I'm still a little embarrassed about. I fought the first half of that battle with nothing but the Wolf Slayer blade and level 8 basic saber technique. No ice, no thunderblade, no sound system, no tiger fury, no dream self. Just the starter skill I'd sunk 500,000 yuan into, and the first weapon I ever picked off a menu. I wanted to know what my floor was. It turns out my floor is 6 heads at a time. I want to be careful here because he cut through 1,000 men is the kind of sentence that means nothing. So let me tell you what it actually looked like. They came at me in a press 4 and 5 deep up a stone stair 30 feet wide. And the technique that a level 8 basic saber technique produces is not flashy. There are no arcs of light. There is no name shouted before a strike. It is economical. Every cut ends exactly where the next one starts, and the blade never travels through empty air, and the man in front of you goes down in the direction that inconveniences the man behind him. Nobody got past me on either side. That's the whole report. The pile in front of me got high enough that they started tripping on it, and then it got high enough that they started climbing it, and for about 20 minutes, I was simply the most efficient object in that valley. Behind me, the two who hadn't left were doing their own work. Zhang Li had learned something since the bus. She wasn't summoning one ghost anymore. She had 3 out, and she wasn't using them to fight. She was using them to close doors. Every time a group of cultivators tried to come around my flank up the side of the stair, a cold white shape was standing in the gap when they got there, and by the time they dealt with it, they were back in front of me again. And Lin Hao, level whatever he'd claimed, 14 years old, stood on the step above with his pistol in both hands and did the thing that no player in this world ever volunteers to do. He healed the Wuji disciples, not me, not himself. He picked out gray-robed strangers from another universe who were bleeding on the stairs. He put his hand on them and put them back on their feet one after another for 20 minutes until he was gray in the face and swaying. There is exactly one priest in this story. He is a kid with a month of borrowed life who bought the class card to save himself and then spent it on other people. Around minute 15, one of the sect's own elders, an old man with a white topknot and a sword he clearly hadn't drawn in a decade, stopped fighting long enough to stare at the 3 of us. "Which sect?" he shouted. "Are you from?" "We're not," I said, and cut down 2 more. Then their saber master came down off the ship, gaunt, tall, robes hanging off him, and he laughed the entire time he fought, not madly, but with real enjoyment, the way you laugh when you finally found someone worth the trouble. He was better than me, I'll say that plainly. His technique had things in it that my inherited 10 years didn't cover. He read my flow state twice and made me pay for it both times, and about 90 seconds into that duel, I heard my own blade crack, the Wolf Slayer blade. My first pick cracked along the spine, 2/3 of the way up. I stepped back and put it away. "Warm-up's over," I said. "Time to send you on your way." Then I drew the Thunder Dragon blade for the first time. He didn't get to use it. He was still adjusting his stance when the source of ice took him. Not a blast, just a decision made at a distance of 4 meters that the water in that man was going to stop moving. He froze mid-motion with his sword up and his mouth open on a laugh. His head came off and I turned to the valley and I used the blade's active thunderstorm. Chain lightning out to 160 meters, jumping from body to body across a battlefield where the 2 sides were completely intermingled. Demonic cultivators in black, Wuji disciples in gray, standing shoulder to shoulder in a melee. It killed about 50 of them. Not one Wuji disciple was touched, not one. The lightning went past them, around them, between them, and took only the ones in black. And the gray-robed men it passed through stood there with their hair standing on end, unhurt, staring at me. I have no idea how it knew. I have never had a satisfactory explanation for that, and I have stopped asking for one. Then I went up. There is no flying in that world, not for anyone below the very top of a sect, and Chen Haoran's 200-meter launch had been the single most impressive thing anybody in that valley had ever seen. It had cost him most of what he had. I made a step of ice in the air in front of me, then I stood on it and made another one and another. I walked up into the sky toward a bone ship 300 meters long at a normal walking pace, one stair at a time, while 1,000 people on both sides of a battle stopped fighting to watch. I want to be honest, I did it that way on purpose. I could have gone up in 3 jumps. Ice steps are not elegant, and they are not fast, and building them under your own feet while moving is fiddly work. But there were about 400 demonic cultivators still alive in that valley, and every single one of them was looking up at a man taking a staircase into the sky. I have found that morale is a weapon you don't have to reload. About 60 of them stopped fighting and ran before I reached the hull. On the deck, I met the twin swords, two brothers, one white-haired, one black-haired, who were apparently very famous and who informed me of this at some length. They fought together, which was smart, and they died together, which was efficient. And in the ship's central hall, I found Chen Haoran, sect leader, golden light guttering, being taken apart by 4 demonic elders at once. I evened that out. When it was over, there were roughly 2,000 dead in that valley, and there was one player standing in it. Chen Haoran walked me up the mountain himself, which is apparently a very great honor, and in a hall with incense burning, he gave me 2 things. The first was a Wuji pill. Excellent grade, a permanent +10 to every attribute I have, and a passive called Exceptional Talent at level 8, which is +100% cultivation speed and +10% to every breakthrough I ever attempt. The second was a jar of 22 Heavenly Origin pills, which he handed over the way you'd hand over cough drops. Yes, those ones. That's where they came from, and I'd like to note that on the morning I gave one to a boy in a wheelchair, I genuinely did not know what it would do, and the old man who gave them to me had no idea he had just bought a 14-year-old in another universe a second life. Then Chen Horan offered me a position, guest elder of the Wuji sect, a courtyard on the mountain, 1,200 tells of silver a month, 3 days a month in the sect's body tempering cold pool, which is apparently something people kill for. And because accepting a role inside a dungeon world creates a standing connection to it, 3 trips into that world per day, forever, whenever I like. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The reward panel for that dungeon gave me 5 picks and delivered them straight into my personal space, which the system had never done before and which I took as an apology. First, the mysterious Chaos Secret Realm, the private universe that ended up behind my coats. Second, and this is the one I want to tell you about properly because it's the best thing in this entire story, and it isn't a weapon, the Limitless Golden Body Skill. Excellent grade. It started as a common iron body technique, was garbage, the kind of thing you'd find in a bin at the back of a sect library, and a nobody picked it up. Not a genius, not a chosen one, a man with no talent who practiced it from boyhood until he was 50 years old and never improved it by a single inch. What he did do was write down everything he tried and everything that failed in order for 40 years. Then his student did the same, and his student's student. 100 years of nobodies failing carefully until one of them found the thing that turned it golden. Then 1,000 years of generations grinding on it, each one adding a paragraph. And at the end of that road, there is a sect with mountains and banners and disciples founded entirely on a technique that a man with no talent refused to put down. I got that in a light orb because I killed some people on a boat. It is worth more than the boat. Third, Jade Silkworm Soft Armor. Fourth, the Wind Concealment Hat. Rare. Optical invisibility, immunity to wind resistance, and a speed bonus. Fifth, the Red Deer Horse. Rare. Which is a Pegasus, an actual flying horse, dark red, silent in the air, cruising speed 880 kilometers an hour, range 5,000 kilometers in a day, requires no food and no rest, Constitution 49, Strength 42, Agility 40, Spirit 46. The forum found out about the bone ship within 2 days. I entered a fantasy dungeon and a warrior big boss single-handedly annihilated over 1,000 demonic sect members. The replies called him a liar for the first 2 pages. Then the eyewitnesses started arriving, the 15 who'd walked to the city and watched the whole thing from a rooftop, which is a detail I enjoy more than I should, and the thread turned into something else entirely. If anyone dares to say the warrior profession is useless again, I'll argue with them. I read that at 2 in the morning in a mansion I'd been paid for curing a child. I thought about a man in a bureau office giving me a polite nod. I decided that from now on, I was never appearing in public as myself again, which is how I became a flying salesman. Here's the operation. I had an elite grade rifle and a giant trench seed to move, and both of them were worth millions, and both of them would get a level 5 nobody arrested or killed if he walked into a shop with them. So, mad treant mask over my face, giving me a stranger's build and a stranger's voice. Wind concealment hat on top of that, which makes both me and my mount optically invisible. And then 800 kilometers an hour on a silent flying horse across 2 provinces, arriving at a skyscraper's 67th floor from the air. Nobody sees a man come in, nobody sees him leave, nobody can describe his face because it isn't his. My first customer was a chairwoman Wu, level 46 gunslinger, in a lounge with a glass wall over a skyline. She tried to knock 4 million off the agreed price in the last 30 seconds of the deal, which is a classic and which I've done myself. Then when I said no, she picked up the rifle we'd been negotiating over and pointed it at me. I've killed over 100 people in dungeon, she said pleasantly, and no less than a handful in the real world. I took it out of her hands, not dramatically. I just crossed the distance and removed it from her grip and stepped back, and then I put it on the table and picked up my bag. She changed tactics faster than anyone I have ever met. By the time I reached the elevator, she was up to 10 million, and it wasn't for the rifle anymore. She wanted me to help her open a door. Specifically, there's a tower inside a solidified gray zone in her province, and inside the tower there's a door, and she couldn't get through it. Sorry, I said. I refuse to cooperate with someone who doesn't keep their word, and I meant it, and I also thought about that door for weeks afterward. Jiang Li got me the bureau's file on it later, and it's a short file because nobody has gotten far enough to write a long one. There are 3 types of tower found inside gray zones: challenge towers, maze towers, and the twin spire type, which the Bureau has classified as level 50 and up, and which nobody in Xia Kingdom has cleared. And there are 2 types of gate: blue ones, which teleport, and white ones, which are events. I cleared a handful of ordinary zones on my way home that night at 800 kilometers an hour in an invisibility hat on a horse. The total haul from all of them was 1 rare grade sea monster item. Trash gray zones, I said to a Pegasus at 4 in the morning, somewhere over the countryside. Not even dogs go there. The next dungeon put me on a concrete street under a sky the color of an old bruise in front of an apartment block, and the number on the nameplate was written in red. Objective: move into apartment 444 and complete at least 3 bloodletter missions. Each mission requires 2 or more original residents as teammates, and at least one of them must survive. Read that last clause again. At least one of them must survive, not all of them. 1. The building manager met us at the door. He was hunched, gray, somewhere past 60, and he moved like a man who had spent decades not making sudden movements. He'd been a player, he'd come here on a run like ours, completed his 3 missions, gone home, gotten older, and then he had come back, on purpose, and stayed. He explained the rules in the lobby in a flat voice without once selling them. Inside the building, there is food, water, electricity, and absolute safety. Nothing can come in. You can live here indefinitely, and many people do. There were about 200 residents, and almost none of them would open their doors to anyone ever for any reason. Outside the building at any time for any reason is death. The ghosts cannot be killed. That's not a difficulty rating. They cannot be killed by anything, by anyone, at any level. They can only be avoided, outrun, tricked, or survived. The one exception is a ghost artifact, an ordinary object that has been mutated by whatever this place runs on. A ghost artifact can briefly contend with a ghost. It also, always, without exception, costs something. My teammates were a level 27 mage in a school uniform who cast in blue-white flame, a level 24 assassin girl who didn't speak unless she had to, and a level 25 gunslinger who, and this got my attention, carried spirit bullets. I told them level 28 and refused to show them my marker, which is a rude thing to do and which they let slide, because in a place like that, everybody has something they'd rather not display. The building itself was the strangest part, and I want to describe it properly because everyone imagines a haunted house, and this was the opposite of a haunted house. It was nice. The lights worked, the elevator worked, there was hot water at any hour, and the pressure was good. There was a communal kitchen on the ground floor with a full pantry that restocked itself overnight, and the food was fine. Not spoiled, not cursed, not ashes in your mouth. Rice, vegetables, cooking oil, eggs. Someone had put a potted plant on the windowsill of the 2nd floor landing at some point. It was alive, and somebody was watering it. 200 people live in there in total safety forever, with food and power and heat. And every one of them is required to go outside on a rotation, on a mission, and the survival rate on the missions is roughly half. That's the whole design. It isn't a trap you escape, it's a life you can have at a price you pay in installments, and the manager had lived that life for 30 years and had come back to it voluntarily after getting out. Our unit was on the 4th floor. 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a window facing the street. There were dishes in the rack that somebody else had washed. The bloodletter missions require original residents on the team, so my first job was to go knock, and my first job went extremely badly. I did the entire 4th floor, 11 doors. 9 of them didn't open at all. No footsteps, no answer, nothing, though I could hear people breathing behind 3 of them, and 1 had a television on. The 10th opened on a chain, and a woman of about 60 looked at me through the gap for 4 seconds and shut it. The 11th opened all the way, and a man in a vest looked at my face and said, New. Don't bother with this floor. He nodded down the corridor. Everyone here's on 7 or 8 missions. They've all decided they're going to be the ones who stop. He shrugged. So they stop. They just stay in. Then the book picks them anyway, and they go out crying. Does that work? Staying in? It works right up until it doesn't, he said, and closed the door politely. Our first night at about 8 in the evening, someone came running down the street toward the door. A resident, coming home late from a mission, sprinting flat out for the entrance with everything he had. The building manager stepped into the doorway and grabbed him by the neck. And then the manager's arm stretched several times its length casually the way a tape measure extends, and he threw the man back out into the street. He isn't human anymore, the manager said and shut the door. Out on the concrete, the thing that had been sprinting stood up. Then its face slid off the front of its head like wet paper, and what was underneath was a long white face with black eyes that had no pupils in them at all. It stood in the road looking up at the windows. 6 residents had gone out that morning. 3 came home. The next day, the blood book produced our mission list, and there were 4 options, and every one of them was lethal. Retrieve something from Rottenbone Lake, spend 1 night in Ghost Village, place an offering at the Temple of the Dead, or watch the sunset on Wangfeng Mountain. That one, said the mage in the school uniform immediately. That one's just standing on a hill. No quern dai a wine sings. Just DSL, I've seen 9 times out of 10, the manager said. The easy one is the trap. Getting anywhere is done by bus 444, which runs on a route nobody chose, and which does not stop for you. There was a resident on that bus, heavyset, mid-40s, a beer belly, and a wedding ring, who had gotten onto the mission roster by lottery and did not want to go. He knelt down in the aisle in front of the manager and begged to be excused. He was refused. He cried for a while, quietly, with his forehead against a seat back, and then he pulled himself together. I thought that was the end of it. Then the bus slowed at a junction, and the sign on the corner named the place after the thing that happens there. And he stood up because he could hear his wife and his son calling him from outside. I caught him at the door. Got a hand on his collar and put him back in his seat and told him what he was hearing. He nodded. He thanked me, and his eyes did not once stop looking out the window. 10 minutes later, at the next junction, he went for the door again, and I grabbed the assassin girl by the arm. She'd started to move. She was going to stop him, and I held on to her, and I let him go. Outside on the road, he ran toward a woman and a boy who were not there and threw his arms around empty air. This is great, he was saying. This is great. I can finally go home. A thin red line opened across his throat, and he stopped talking. The bus didn't slow down. The assassin girl pulled her arm out of my grip and stared at me, and the mage was making a noise, like he wanted to say something and couldn't find it. I gave them the only answer I had. I saved him once. I won't save him a second time, because there is a version of me that spends the entire dungeon dragging that man back from doors, and that version dies on the 3rd day, and so does everyone standing near him. You get one. That's the arithmetic here, and if you don't do the arithmetic, the place does it for you. 3 more passengers got on at the next stop. I want to describe them because they were the most disturbing thing I saw in that world, and none of them threatened anybody. 3 young people in hooded robes, students at what they called Hell Academy. And under the hoods, half of each face had gone, not injured, changed, gray and receded, with scarlet eyes and gums visible past where lips should have been. They do it deliberately. It's the curriculum. You take parts of yourself and you make them into ghost piece by piece, and in exchange, those parts stop being killable. Their survival rate is the best on the entire line. One of them noticed me, looking and smiled with the half of a mouth that still worked. I looked out the window for the rest of the ride. Wangfeng Mountain was a green hill under a gray sky with a path going up it, and the sunset was 3 hours away. It was genuinely, visibly, just a hill. Halfway up, 2 ghost artifacts were lying in the middle of the path. A jacket and a pair of boots, both stained, both left where anyone walking that path would find them. 2 of the residents with us picked them up and put them on. No hesitation, no discussion. One of them was shrugging into that jacket before I finished saying, wait, I want to be clear that these were not stupid people. These were people who had lived in a haunted building for years and knew exactly what a ghost artifact was. They put them on like they'd been handed their own coats. 2 hours later, one of them was walking on tiptoe, just up on the balls of his feet, hands loose at his sides, moving completely silently, and every minute or so a woman's giggle came out of his mouth. The other one had stopped being able to see and had gone very quiet, and something dark was moving up the outside of his trouser legs, from the boots upward slowly. They hadn't found the artifacts. The artifacts had been laid out on the path, and the 2 men who'd picked them up hadn't picked them up at all, because those 2 had been the ghosts since before we boarded the bus, and the jacket and the boots were how they intended to get the rest of us. I killed both of them, which, as established, is not possible, and which is why what happened next happened, because somewhere on that hill, I stopped being a nuisance and became a problem, and the mountain came to talk to me. It came as a short middle-aged man in a plain shirt who was suddenly standing on the path, and the world went out around him, the sky, the grass, the light, and I was in a ghost domain, alone with it, on gray nothing, and it made me an offer. You are strong, it said, stronger than anything that has come here. Cripple apartment 444 from the inside, weaken it, open it, and I will give you this. And I saw the description before it finished the sentence. Heart of the abnormal realm, epic grade, swallow it and it replaces your heart and you become as we are, deathless, the first human being ever to make that crossing. In our world, it said, and it sounded almost warm, there is only respect for strength, no lies, no deceit, no one here will ever cheat you. Isn't that better than where you come from? No. It didn't understand the answer. I could feel it not understanding. The pressure in that domain doubled, then doubled again, and the gray started closing in. We cannot be eliminated. You can never achieve true victory here. One side is death and the other is eternal life. Can't you even choose such a simple option? Stop spouting nonsense, I said. Use your strength to prove it to me. Then I turned everything on at once. Tiger Fury, Flow State, Dream Bloom, Ice, and the speaker in my pocket, track 1 maximum volume, plus 33 to every attribute on a base that had been climbing for weeks. My spirit hit 82, and at 82, I could see it. Not the man in the shirt, the domain itself, the whole gray construct, and running through it like a pin through a soap bubble. One point where the entire thing was anchored, I cut it. The domain came apart, and I was standing on the side of Wangfeng Mountain, again in ordinary daylight. I finally understood what I had been standing on all afternoon. The mountain was the ghost, not on it, not haunting it. The hill itself, all 1,000 meters of it, was the body of the thing that had just offered me immortality. So I froze it, all of it, root to summit in one push, and the entire mountain went white and blue and locked solid, and coiled around it, now visible in the ice, was the shape of an enormous mouth open in the middle of a scream. Then I walked up to the peak and started hacking. I killed it. It came back. I killed it again. It came back, slower. I killed it a third time, and it came back wrong, smaller, thinner, missing pieces of itself. Each resurrection cost it something it couldn't get back, and by the third one, it had stopped talking about eternal life. Ghostly thing, I said, standing on its summit while it dragged itself together underneath me. Do you actually think my goal is to kill you? I just want to weaken you again and again, and then hand you over to the existence you truly fear. I put the epic grade heart in my pocket, whistled up a flying horse, and left while it was still reassembling. I got back to apartment 444 at 3 in the morning, and the glass front door was locked because the building does not open at night for anything. I put both palms on it and iced the frame until the metal contracted. The door opened, not because I broke it, because the building decided somewhere in whatever it uses for a mind that it would rather open the door than find out what I'd do to it. 10 minutes later, I was in my unit's bathroom and words came up on the mirror in dripping red. Human, you possess a power I cannot see through. Where exactly do you come from? I have no reason to help you, I said to a mirror. A pause. Yes, you do, it wrote. Then, Wangfeng Mountain, then, I took your place in teaching it a harsh lesson. The mirror stayed blank for a long time after that, long enough that I brushed my teeth. Speak, it wrote finally. How do you want me to help you so you will leave? I asked for 5 bloodletter missions, very simple ones. The next morning, the building manager stood in the lobby with the blood book open in both hands, reading out the new mission list. I watched a man who had lived in that building for 30 years slowly lose the ability to hold his face together. Mission 1, he read. Choose any room on the surrounding streets. Stay inside it for 5 minutes. He looked up. Mission 2, walk 300 meters outside the building. He looked at me. I looked back with the polite blankness of a man reading a bus timetable. Mission 3, discover any ghostly trace. There were 10 of them. 10. Each one, individually, easier than crossing a road. There has never been a list like it in the history of that building, and the manager knew it. He could not, for the life of him, understand why the thing he'd served for 3 decades had suddenly fallen in love with a young man who'd been there 4 days. The rules still required residents on the team. I got assigned the 2 best in the building, He Feng and Liu Mei, a pair who between them had survived 7 missions each and had achieved something like legendary status among 200 people who mostly never opened their doors. They came down to the lobby, braced for the worst day of their lives. We completed 3 bloodletter missions on a 10-minute walk. We went into a room. We stood in it. We came out. We walked down the street to the corner and back. We looked at a stain on a wall and agreed that it was a ghostly trace. By the second one, He Feng had stopped talking. By the third, Liu Mei was standing in the middle of a road she had never in her life dared to stand in, holding a book that said her mission was complete, saying no over and over in a very small voice. Level 7, and the reward list had 4 picks on it with epic on the menu. First, and it is the single most valuable thing I own, the undying ghoul ring. You cannot truly die. You set a respawn point in advance, and when you are killed, you come back at it. and it works across worlds, which means a death in a dungeon does not strand you. The first death is free and clean. The second costs 1 minute of downtime and leaves a slight taint on your personality. The third, 1 hour and a moderate one. The fourth, 1 day and severe. The fifth and beyond, 1 month and an irreversible transformation into a ghoul. So it's 4 lives and then it's the end of being a person. And the ring tells you all of this up front in the description, which I have come to understand is this world's idea of fair dealing. Second, the gate of deception domain. Excellent. It lets me bind a physical area and turn it into a sealed, private, abnormal realm. My own version of what that mountain dragged me into, expandable up to 1,000 cubic kilometers and summonable from anywhere in the same world. I bound my own villa. From the street, it looks like a house with a garden and a pool. Anyone who walks through my gate without permission is not in a house. They are in the tightest cell in the world with no doors, and the walls belong to me. Third, the invisible, mysterious garment. Excellent. It has no shape of its own. It becomes whatever clothing I picture instantly, which after 3 weeks of quick changing in alleys felt like a bigger upgrade than the ring. Plus 30% damage reduction, plus 10 spirit, and an active called Invisible. Total immunity to all damage, 1 minute per day. Fourth, shadow sneak shoes. Excellent, plus 35% movement, plus 10 agility, and the ability to walk through walls and sink down into the ground for 15 minutes a day. Inside a shadow, my speed doubles and my damage goes up by half. I came out of that dungeon in the same clothes I went in wearing into a mansion I owned. I want to note the shape of the last 2 months for you because I hadn't stopped to look at it until then. Empty chest, wolf slayer blade, tiger tattoo, necklace, belt, bracers, gauntlets, ring, force field, speaker, rifle, ice, dragon slayer title, a private universe behind my coats, 4 spare lives on my finger, and a house that eats intruders. That's the whole tally, and it is the only time in this story I'm going to give you one, because I have met people who recite their inventories and I would rather be shot. The monster nest arrived a few days after that, out of a different dungeon, and it changed what my house was. It comes as a dark red rubber ball about the size of a fist. You put it down somewhere with room and it unfolds. 15 meters tall, 100 meters across, a mountain of dark red flesh with grooves and pores all over it in a pattern that made my skin crawl every time I looked at it directly. I put it inside my abnormal realm where nobody would ever see it, which was both a security decision and an aesthetic one. It breeds monsters. About 100 types from a catalog: bone demons, winged demons, beholders, fire demons, and further down the list, succubi. You feed it fresh meat and bone, and it produces what you ordered. I ordered 2 succubi because they were the only entry on the entire list with human-level intelligence. They came out horned and tailed with orange vertical pupils, and they were, I want to be clear, extremely polite. They knelt. They offered me their names. The names were about 100 words long each. I made it 4 syllables into the first one before I stopped her. Seraphina, I said. You're Seraphina? As my lord commands. And you're Isolde. The wheat-skinned one bowed so deeply her horns nearly hit the floor. I bought the maid outfits, black and white, the classic kind, because the caps hide the horns and the dresses hide the tails. And a man with 2 horned women in his kitchen has some explaining to do to the neighborhood committee. House rules were short. 1 rule, really. You do not eat humans, ever. Under any circumstances. Seraphina's whole face fell. Ever? Ever. She recovered admirably, and neither of them ever raised it again, and I have chosen not to ask what she was hoping for. They don't sleep, so they get through a lot of television. About a week in, I came downstairs at 6 in the morning and found them standing in the kitchen holding 2 plates, both of them absolutely rigid with fear, because they had taught themselves to cook from a program on the Food Channel and had produced fried eggs and slices of steamed bun fried until they were black at the edges. They'd made a mistake, they said. They were prepared to be punished. I ate all of it. Then I sat them both down at the kitchen table, which took some doing because neither of them believed they were allowed to sit at it. I laid out how this was going to work. They were not servants. That was the first thing, and it took the longest, because a creature bred out of a wall of flesh 48 hours earlier has some very firm ideas about hierarchy, and none of them involve chairs. They would be paid in money, which they had no use for, so I opened accounts for them and showed them how the cards worked, and Isolde spent her first month's wages on a rice cooker and a set of knives, and Seraphina spent hers on 11 different kinds of shampoo. They would learn to pass. That was the important one. Caps on outdoors, dresses long, no wings ever, no vertical pupils in daylight, and if anyone asked, they were cousins from the north, and if anyone pushed, they were to walk away and call me, and they would not eat humans. What if a human attacks first? Seraphina asked with the crisp precision of someone who has found a loophole and would like it confirmed. Then you call me. But you call me. She has never once broken that rule, and I have watched her wander twice. Out in the garden, the Pegasus had discovered agriculture. I'd bought Red Deer 300 kilograms of pork on the assumption that a warhorse from a cultivation world eats like a predator. He looked at it with polite bewilderment and then ate all of the apples and carrots instead. 30 kilos of them, 1 apple and 2 carrots per bite, working through 2 enormous sacks in about 4 minutes. Then he stopped and turned his head away when I brought out another bag. "There's more." "No," said the horse. "Eating too much will make me fat, and if I am fat, I cannot run fast." 880 kilometers an hour, and he's watching his figure. That was my life. Briefly, a mansion, 2 maids who couldn't cook, a dieting Pegasus, and a flesh mountain in my pocket dimension. Then I got a dungeon with the rules turned off, survived 7 days, no reward settlement at the end. Monsters drop their loot on the ground where they die. And on its own line, in case anybody missed it, player versus player has no penalty mechanism. I read that last line standing on a wasteland of rotting bodies under a red-brown sky, and I understood the design immediately. No punishment level for killing another player, no system consequence at all. And since the monsters drop loot instead of paying out in chests, everything anyone finds in the next 7 days is a physical object that can be taken off a body. The dungeon had scattered us deliberately. I couldn't see another human being in any direction. The first thing I found was the source of the wasteland, about a kilometer underground, and I found it by accident because the ground kept twitching. It was a tumor, a mountain-sized, brain-shaped mass of tissue, buried breathing, and every few minutes it shed a small piece of itself, and each piece crawled up through the dirt and became a monster. That's the whole ecosystem. That's where all of them came from. I killed it, which took a while and was extremely unpleasant, and its death took a few hundred small fry with it, and then the pop-ups started. This is the part of my cheat that nobody warns you about. Every kill that isn't a boss generates its own little reward list, and the lists don't queue politely, they stack. I had just killed one large thing and roughly 200 small things simultaneously, and my entire field of vision filled with translucent panels offering me rusted knives, torn hides, a bent spoon, and something called a hunger belt. I stood in a crater underground, blind, waving my hand through menus like a man fighting a swarm of wasps for a full minute and a half. I have a cheat that lets me pick my own rewards from every kill in the world. Its practical drawback is that it also insists on showing me every kill in the world. Above ground, I went looking for people, and the first place I found was Lion Eye Camp, a fortified military post, walls, banners, a gate with guards. The guards refused me entry. Reasonable. I was a stranger in the wasteland with a sword, so I went around the side and walked in through the ground. 15 minutes a day, the Shadow Sneak shoes will take you through solid matter, and there is no better use of them than walking under a wall and coming up inside a garrison behind the latrines. Once inside, I did the one thing that surprised everybody, which was pay for things. There was a cavalryman on the supply lines who wouldn't take a bribe. Wouldn't take one from me, wouldn't take one from anybody, said his price list was his price list. I bought a week of rations and 2 maps from him at the posted rate and tipped him nothing because he wouldn't have taken it. And out of that entire dungeon, he is the man I remember most fondly. Then while I was still in the camp, a player massacred the gate guards for fun. Trenchcoat, sunglasses, gunslinger. He walked up to the main gate in broad daylight and killed everyone on it, then spent about 10 minutes kiting an armored knight in circles around the courtyard, shooting him in the joints and laughing and taunting the archers on the wall by name. Then he got on a motorcycle, an actual motorcycle, in a medieval fantasy world and drove out through the broken gate. That's what no penalty mechanism means. Somewhere in that man's head, a switch had been thrown, and the dungeon had been the one to throw it. The other settlement in that region was Hardingtown, built down inside a natural basin, walled and gated, and holding somewhere around 100,000 people who had fled there from the demonic tide that was eating the continent. It was run by Baron Harding. He received me personally, which should have been my first clue. He was in his 40s, well kept, with the kind of warm eye contact that people practice. He came down the steps of his own hall to shake my hand. On a pillar behind his chair sat a crystal about the size of a fist, and it was gently, constantly glowing. The all-seeing crystal, he said when he caught me looking. A gift. It came to me in a dream. A voice told me where to dig, and there it was. What it does is detect hostile intent within 1,000 meters. Not weapons, not movement, intent. Anyone within a kilometer of the Baron who so much as thinks about attacking him lights up on that crystal like a struck match. Then he made his offer, and it was a good one. The old holy capital, Eifelin, lies in ruins about 2,000 kilometers away, overrun. Somewhere in it is a holy relic. Bring it back, and he will perform a great purification ritual and end the demonic tide across the whole continent. Payment, 1 free pick from his vault of rare grade equipment. Everything you loot in the holy capital, keep it all. and, on completion, a custom excellent grade weapon forged for you personally by the master smith of Frost Harbor. I said yes, so did about a dozen other players, because it was, straightforwardly, the best deal in the dungeon. There was one odd detail: people tried to rob the vault. Of course they did, and every single one was caught instantly, because intent is intent whether you're pointing it at a baron or his silverware. And they weren't executed. They were taken quietly into a tall black tower at the back of the compound and not seen again. I noticed, I filed it, I did not act on it, and I've thought about that a lot since. I went down into the town before we left, because I wanted to see what 100,000 refugees looks like when somebody is actually taking care of them. The answer is crowded and orderly, and better than it had any right to be. There were rows of long shelter halls built out of good timber. There was a water system. There were children in the streets, a lot of them running in packs the way children do when adults have decided the situation is under control. And there was a bakery working 3 shifts, and outside it, a queue that moved. People talked about the Baron the way you talk about a levy, not warmly, gratefully. He'd taken them in when the walled cities to the north had closed their gates, and every single person in that basin knew it and said so. The vault was in the compound behind the hall, and my free pick was genuine. The guard let me in alone and stood outside, which is either extraordinary trust or extraordinary confidence in a glowing rock. There were maybe 60 rare grade items in there on racks: swords, a mail shirt, a censer, a set of gauntlets, 3 rings, a crossbow with a silver mechanism. All of it old, all of it maintained, all of it. I noticed this and didn't understand it until much later. Anti-dark, blessed steel, purified silver, consecrated leather. Every single item in that room was designed to hurt exactly one category of thing. I took a ring and put it in my storage and never used it. On the way out, I passed the Black Tower and looked up at it because it was the only structure in that entire compound with no windows on the lower 2/3, and because a man had gone into it that morning and had not come out. The convoy left the next morning. Wagons, guards, a teleport array to cover the first leg, and a shield maiden called Sarah, who had served the Baron since she was a teenager and who spoke about him the way people speak about weather that has always been kind to them. She'd come from a village 3 days east that isn't there anymore. She'd been 15. The Baron's riders had picked up about 40 survivors off that road. She had spent the 11 years since paying it back. She told me all of this on the first night in the perfectly ordinary tone of a woman explaining why she took a particular job. He came out himself, she said. The Baron, he didn't send anyone. He rode out and he came back with children on his saddle. I liked her enormously, and I want you to know that before what happens next happens, she had a smaller version of the crystal. She used it all night to pick our routes, not to find enemies, but to find the paths where nothing intended us harm. It worked beautifully right up until the holy capital. We came into Eifelen through a street of collapsed marble, and 100 meters in, the street filled with fire. The thing standing in it was a dragon made of bone, wreathed in flame. It was wide enough that its shoulders touched buildings on both sides. It did not charge. It swept, a pillar of hellfire left to right down the length of the street, methodically, giving nobody anywhere to be. Our mages threw everything they had. Ice arrows evaporated, bullets went into it and stopped mattering. One of the players got a shot into its eye socket, and the fire didn't so much as flicker. Sarah gave the retreat order. I watched her face while she gave it, and she had already written the mission off, and her Baron with it. Then the heat stopped. She stopped the way a shower stops, and something extremely large hit the ground hard enough to crack the street. The Hell Demon Dragon was a frozen sculpture, every flame gone, every bone locked inside a shell of ice crystals 1/2 meter thick, and standing on its skull was an ordinary young man in ordinary leather armor, hacking away at its neck joint with what appeared to be considerable effort and no success at all. Sorry, I called down. I think this one might have been sick or something, some kind of illness. In any case, I know for a fact that the Wolfslayer blade in my hand definitely couldn't have killed it. Sarah looked at me for a long, long moment. The Wolfslayer blade, she repeated. It's a good blade. They let it go because the alternative was to think about it, and nobody in that street had the appetite. I picked up the dragon's rewards later, privately, using a technique I'd worked out and am quite proud of. Leave a dream self, standing where the group can see it, walk the real body 2 streets over, collect, come back, swap. Magic Dragon Battle armor, excellent. 3 properties: Flame Breath, Flame Shield, and a set of Wings of Fire that produce actual flight, and the Magic Dragon Ring, excellent, plus 160% fire damage, and an active called Incarnate as Fire. An elite monster in the next district dropped 1 rare ring on the pavement. I watched 4 surviving players nearly shoot each other over it while a ruined city full of demons listened. I flew for the first time that night over the broken skyline with Wings of Fire and nobody watching. I want to be honest about what that did to me. I have had a lot of upgrades in this story, and most of them are numbers. This one wasn't. I went up above the ruins with the wind going past and a dead city underneath and no ground anywhere near me. I laughed out loud like an idiot for about 10 minutes. That feeling of uninhibited freedom. There is nothing else like it, and every power I own since is judged against that first flight and found slightly wanting. Then, 4 days later, I found the holy relic. Except, there was no holy relic. What was in the cathedral at the center of Eiffelin was an altar, black stone, and Sarah's crystal read it as clean, and Sarah's crystal was wrong, because I could see through it. There were human skulls set into the interior of that stone. There were sealed jars inside it, and inside those, things I am not going to describe to you. I checked that entire building twice, and there was no relic in it, anywhere, in any form. Sarah, I said, don't put it down. But the Baron was already talking to her through the crystal, and his voice was warm and fervent, and full of the specific joy of a man watching a decade of planning arrive. He talked about the tide ending. He talked about her mother's village. He talked her through it, step by step, the way you talk someone through a difficult recipe. She placed the crystal on the altar, and 2,000 kilometers away, on top of a tall black tower in the middle of a walled town holding 100,000 refugees, Baron Harding raised both arms and started to shout, "Oh, great Lord of Hell, your humble servant offers you the cruelest battle. Oh, exalted God of darkness, I offer you the freshest lives. Oh, supreme endless abyss, I offer you the most intense pain and hatred. Sacrifice ritual, begin!" Dark rifts opened inside his own town, inside the walls, in the market square, in the residential quarter, in the shelter halls where the refugees slept, and out of them came the tide he had promised to end. 100,000 people, his people, the ones who had run to him. And in Eiffelin, every monster in that ruined city stood up at once and came for us. Sarah didn't move. She stood in front of that altar with her hands still out and her face completely blank, saying one thing over and over, impossible. Baron couldn't possibly do such a thing. Impossible. On the tower, watching the rifts open in his own streets, Baron Harding spread his arms wide and wept with joy. All great works require necessary sacrifices. My townspeople, your merits I shall forever remember. I froze the entire central ruins, one ring of absolute zero, out from where I stood, and every monster inside 2 kilometers stopped moving in the middle of whatever it was doing. It saved every player and every guard in that district, and I want to be very clear that this was not a rescue. I did it because I needed the street quiet so I could think for 4 seconds. Then I went for the teleport array, and the teleport array would not start for me. Of course it wouldn't. He'd built it. It was his. So I called the horse, 2,000 kilometers at 880 kilometers an hour on a flying horse, with an entire town being fed into the dark behind a wall I couldn't see in an hour and a half. The town had a barrier over it by the time I arrived. A dome, sealed, with the sounds of what was happening inside it muffled down to nothing. I hit it with everything I own at the same time. Source of Ice, Tiger Fury, Dream Bloom Consecutive Slash, Thunder Dragon Blade, and the speaker at maximum volume. The whole shelf all at once, no economy. The dome came apart. The tower had its own barrier, and I cut that in a single stroke on the way in, which is the only genuinely graceful thing I did that day. Baron Harding was on the platform at the top with his arms still up. I froze him mid-gesture, except he didn't freeze all the way. His fingers kept moving, and his eyes tracked me. I could feel the cold sliding off him like water off oiled canvas, and around his neck there was a necklace. Harding's legacy, excellent grade, family heirloom, near total immunity to mental influence, 90% reduction to every control effect in existence, and 10% off all incoming damage. That is why the man was fearless, not courage, jewelry. I took it off him, and he set solid immediately, like wet cement finding out about winter. Then I let his head and his mouth thaw, and I asked him what he had done. He told me it was an accident. He kept telling me it was an accident. For the better part of an hour, frozen to a stone floor above a town that had 100,000 fewer people in it than it had that morning, that man explained to me, patiently, warmly, with the exact same eye contact he'd used when he shook my hand, that the ritual had gone wrong, that the crystal had misled him, that he was as grieved as anyone, that he had lost everything he'd built. And here's the thing that scared me more than the dragon did. He was good at it, and he never once did the thing that liars do, which is get better at the story. His account didn't improve under pressure. It stayed exactly as ragged and partial and inconsistent as a true account would be. He forgot a detail and came back to it later and corrected himself. He admitted things that made him look bad, that he'd been warned, that he'd ignored the warning, that he had been arrogant. He wept about the bakery. He named 3 people who'd worked in it. I started to doubt myself. Genuinely. Somewhere in that hour, I began putting together the possibility that I had flown 2,000 kilometers on rage and misread a man who'd been handed a poisoned gift in a dream by something that wanted 100,000 deaths, that the real villain was the voice in the dream, and that I was standing on a tower interrogating a bereaved administrator who had lost everything he'd built and was going to have to live in it. I actually took my hand off my sword. Then he asked me, carefully, kindly, in the voice of a man offering to share a burden, whether I would help him rebuild. He nearly had me. I want that on the record too, because I have spent this entire story telling you how clever I am. And the truth is that a provincial administrator in a frozen coat talked a man with 105 constitution most of the way around in under an hour. Then my eye went to the crystal on the pillar, the all-seeing crystal. His gift returned to its stand after the ritual, still faintly glowing. And because my cheat does not care whose property something is, a description opened next to it: supreme blood, epic grade, ageless, longevity, plus 3,000 years. Extraordinary, all attributes, plus 50. Supreme, you may collect and use the power of faith. The door to godhood is always ajar for you. It wasn't a crystal. It never had been. It was a drop of divine blood, and the dream that told him where to dig had been a transaction, and the entire arrangement, the tower, the vault, the free equipment, the generous terms, the quest for a relic that did not exist, had been the down payment on 100,000 lives that a god was collecting, and the Baron got to keep the change. Everything snapped into place at once, and I looked down at a man frozen to his own floor who had almost talked me into believing him. Baron Harding, I said, although your methods are very dirty and despicable, I must say I am very grateful for everything you've done. He didn't understand until I picked up the crystal. No, I cracked it open on the edge of the Wolfslayer blade. No, you can't do that. That is mine. Do you have any idea what I drank it. Constitution 105, Strength 112, Agility 105. Spirit 111. 10 times an ordinary human being in every column, all at once, standing on a tower with my hands still shaking. And in the middle of that, the exact moment I should have been celebrating, I had the thought that has been sitting at the back of my skull ever since. 2 days. I had been in that dungeon for 2 days. In 2 days, I had picked up an excellent armor, an excellent ring, a flight ability, a domain, and a drop of divine blood that made me 10 times a man. And what had it cost me? A dragon I killed by touching it, a baron I caught by flying. The obstacles are completely disproportionate to the rewards. Nothing in that dungeon had come close to killing me, and it had paid me like something had. Is the game fattening me up? I didn't have an answer. I still don't have a complete one, but I stopped thinking of my cheat as free money that afternoon and started thinking of it as a tab somebody was keeping. I did not kill Baron Harding. Everyone I've told this to assumes I did, and the reason I didn't is simple. A provincial baron does not get a personal audience with a hell god. A man who can buy a drop of divine blood with one ritual is not a man. He's an account, and accounts have owners, and I wanted to know who. So I healed him. The sound system's second track heals allies, and it will not fire on an enemy, so I designated Baron Harding as an ally in my own head for about 4 seconds, which is one of the more disgusting things I have ever had to do. Then I knocked him out with a controlled strike, dug a pit, ventilated it, put him in it, and rolled a rock over the top with a gap for air. The next morning, I brought him bread and a water skin, and lowered them in on a string like a man tending livestock. I posted a dream self at the pit and left it there. On my way out of the region, I ran into the thin-masked assassin for the 3rd time. I'd seen him twice before, once at Lion Eye Camp in the crowd, and once at the Wild Rose Tavern nursing a drink he didn't finish. Both times we'd registered each other and moved on the way professionals do. This time he was in a ruined house dying of venom with a wandering pack of demons about 10 minutes down the road. I checked him for anything worth taking. There was nothing. Not a coin, not a scroll, not one item worth the trouble of a search. He was the poorest successful player I have ever met. I used my last healing of the day on him anyway. He was quiet for a while afterward. Then he said he disliked owing favors and offered me the only thing he'd found in 5 days, which was a damaged ring of light. I turned it down and asked him for information instead. He gave me an hour of it. Routes, patrols, which districts had gone bad, which players had started hunting other players, and what they carried. Best trade I made in that world. Then I went and opened Baron Harding's vault, which I had, technically, earned. Every rare item in it had been destroyed, not stolen, chewed. The demons that had come through the rifts had gone into that vault and systematically wrecked every single piece of equipment in it, because anything forged against the dark is a thing they cannot help but destroy on instinct. There was a monster lying dead in the doorway with a bent longsword still in its teeth. I stood in a treasure room full of scrap metal and laughed until I had to sit down. I spent the last 5 days of that dungeon hunting elites in the ruins of Eiffelin and staying well away from the palace at the center because there was something under a seal in there and the seal leaked when you got close, and what leaked out of it was enough to tell me that the Hell Demon Dragon had been a doorman. The best thing I found in those 5 days was a cup, the tainted Holy Grail. Excellent grade. What it does is cast a corruption curse at any distance, anywhere in the same world, and all it needs is a name, a face, and a location. If it takes, the target stops being a person and becomes a monster under my control, and it searches. You can give it partial information and it will produce a list of candidates with faces like the world's worst search engine. Level 9. I came home to Dongjiang with 111 spirit, and that is when I noticed the threads. I was in my own kitchen. Serafina was putting a plate down in front of me. I saw something running between her and me. Thin, dim, barely there at all, like a hair of light in a dark room. There was a second one going to Isolde across the room. I'd never seen them before because you cannot see them below about 100 spirit, and until 2 days earlier, I had been at 49. That's faith. That's the 4th clause of the Supreme Blood, the one I'd read as flavor text. You may collect and use the power of faith. They believed in me, not religiously, practically, absolutely, the way you believe in the floor. And that belief was a physical substance running down a line into my chest in quantities so small they barely registered. So I ran the experiment because I'm an office worker at heart. I bred 30 more monster types out of the nest and watched for threads. Bone demons, nothing. Winged demons, nothing. Beholders, nothing, and they have 11 eyes. Fire demons, nothing. Only the intelligent ones produced anything at all, and only barely. To collect a meaningful amount of faith from succubi, I calculated I would need somewhere in the region of several million of them, and there is not enough pork in Dongjiang, so breeding believers is a dead end, which leaves the other road, the one that every religion in the history of every world has taken. Don't make believers. Spread a faith. The next dungeon called itself the City of Paradise, which is the kind of name that tells you everything. Objective: join a local gang and collectively eliminate 30 enforcers and 3 bosses in gang conflicts. 5 players, dropped at the edge of a slum the size of a district, corrugated iron, open drains, power lines strung between shacks by hand, and about 400,000 people living in it. We were ambushed within 11 minutes. The other 4 ran, which was correct. I stayed, which was also correct because I wanted to be robbed. A triangle-eyed kid of about 20 put a pistol in my face and demanded everything I had, and behind him were 4 of his friends with pipes and 1 very old shotgun, and he did the whole speech. He was good at it. There was patter. I froze his 4 friends stiff where they stood. Then I took his pistol, hooked the Thule demon whip around his arm, and told him to walk me to his boss. You don't. That's the Iron Wolf Gang, man. You don't just walk. The Iron Wolf Gang's headquarters was a corrugated shed with a card table in it and 9 men sitting around it. I opened the conversation by freezing the entire table, including the cards, including the cigarettes in 3 separate mouths. Then I looked at the kid at the end of my whip. Slap him. What? The boss. Slap him. He did. He did it badly. The first time out of terror. Then he did it again. Better. Now use the whip. Sir. Bao Min, I said, because he told me his name on the walk over, mostly out of nerves. Either you're on the table or you're at it. Pick. He picked, and then he finished the job, and by the time it was done, there was a vacancy at the head of the Iron Wolf Gang. Not bad, I said. I like people who are quick and efficient like you. You're second in command. By that afternoon, I had been elected leader of a slum gang by acclamation, which is not a sentence I ever expected to say about myself. Then I found out what a slum gang actually does, and it reorganized my afternoon. I had assumed protection rackets and drugs. There was some of that, but the Iron Wolf Gang's main daily business, it turned out, was water. The municipal supply into that district had been cut 11 years earlier. The gang ran a pump. They charged for it, and the price was high, because 2 bigger gangs taxed the pipe upstream and would burn the pump if the money stopped. That's the economy. 30 men with pipes standing between 400,000 people and a pump, taking a cut and passing most of it up. Bauman explained all of this to me in the shed while a man mopped the floor around us. He explained it the way you'd explain the weather. No shame in it, no defense of it, just the shape of a world he'd been born into at the bottom of. How much of it goes upstream? 70? Not anymore. We went up the pipe that same evening. The gang that held the first junction had 11 men and a rooftop with a machine gun on it. I want you to understand that I did not fight them. I walked up to the junction, put my hand on the valve housing, and froze the entire building they were standing in from the ground floor up, slowly, so that they had about 40 seconds to get out and watch it happen. They came down the fire escape and stood in the street and looked at it. 70, I said. Goes to 0. Tell whoever you pay. They told him. That's how the Black Fist Gang found out about me, and that is why they came into my slum at dawn. Baomin changed over those 2 days in a way I didn't plan and didn't expect. The kid who'd put a pistol in my face on day 1 had been running on pure nerve and a very short life expectancy. By the second morning, he was doing inventory. He'd worked out how much water 30 men could distribute if nobody was skimming it, and he'd made a list. He brought the list to me at 6 a.m. with the specific anxious pride of a man who has never once in his life been asked for his opinion. I told him it was good work. He went and stood outside for a minute after that, facing away from the shed, and then came back in and never mentioned it. At dawn the next day, the Black Fist Gang came into the slum to harvest, 200 of them, all high on something out of a Penglai pharmaceuticals bottle, bigger than they should have been, faster than they should have been, and completely incapable of feeling anything. They came in at first light, and they weren't there for territory. They were there for what they called goods, and I will come back to what goods means in this city. I froze their boss in the middle of the main street, mid-stride in front of everybody. Then I stood behind my 2 gunslingers and told them to take their time. 200 stimulant blind elites in a straight street against 2 men on a roof with all the ammunition they wanted and no one shooting back. It took most of the morning. Nobody on my side got a scratch. By noon, a gang of 30-odd men with pipes had taken 4 gangs worth of territory, and the body count across the district was somewhere near 1,000, and the entire city of Paradise was talking about a slum boss with a superpower. And in the dead Black Fist boss's safe, I found the contract with Penglai Pharmaceuticals, complete sets of human organs in exchange for money and drugs, signed, itemized, with a delivery schedule. That's what goods meant. That's what they had come into my slum at dawn to collect. I put the contract in my pocket and started working out how to get into a building. I didn't have to. They came to me. The Iron Wolf Gang's previous second in command, the one who'd run when I took over, sold me to Penglai as a research subject, and Penglai sent a car. The man who shook my hand in the lobby was a scientist, and the handshake was the test, a biowave scanner in the palm, reading me while he smiled. I found out later what it told him because I found the printout. Completely surpassed humanity. Those were the words on the sheet. Then Agent Evelyn Pierce walked me up to the 36th floor. Blonde, blue-eyed, beautifully dressed, and cold in a way that had clearly been trained rather than born. She showed me into a corner office with no windows that opened, sat me down, offered me a drink, and then excused herself to go and get some coffee beans she'd been saving. The door locked behind her, and then the vents opened and something colorless started coming in, and her voice came over the ceiling speakers, warm and reasonable. We want to cooperate with you. We want to jointly research the unique power within you. Please understand, all your efforts and sacrifices will be valuable and beneficial to all of humanity. I sat in the boss's chair with my legs crossed and let her finish the entire speech because I have a bioforce field, 105 constitution, and an active immunity to negative effects in my pocket, and because I genuinely wanted to hear how it ended. It ended with, "You'll thank us." Then I used entering dream and break dream and stepped out of a sealed room on the 36th floor into an empty street a kilometer away. After that, it was housekeeping. I went back in through the loading bay, and then I went up through the building floor by floor. I did it slowly because I wanted to see it. Floor 11 was administration. Floor 14 was a clean lab with real scientists in it doing real work on real medicine. I want to be clear that those people had no idea. Floor 19 was where it changed. Floor 19 had a badge reader that read badges and also read something else, and past it the corridors had no windows and the doors had observation panels in them. I did not go into those rooms. I looked through 2 of them with a scope that sees through walls from the stairwell, and then I stopped looking, and that is as much as I am going to tell you about floor 19. Manager Zhang was on 22 in a corner office on the phone. I hunted him through the walls of his own building, watching him move from room to room through 20 meters of concrete, letting him get to a door, and then being on the other side of it for about 6 minutes, which was 5 minutes longer than necessary, and which I am not going to pretend was accidental. He gave me the informant's name on the first ask. I found Evelyn Pierce on a stairwell between 28 and 29 and took every planned document she was carrying, and when she really realized what was standing in the stairwell with her, she went from agent to supplicant in under 4 seconds, on her knees, both hands out, offering me anything, everything, names, accounts, her own superiors. That's what finished it for me. "When you thought you could control me, you used coercive methods," I said. "The moment you realized you couldn't, you immediately groveled." She kept talking. She was still talking when I turned around. "You all deserve to die." Then I walked out onto the street, and I froze all 3 Penglai Pharmaceuticals buildings at once. Whole, foundation to roof, including the helipads, including the 2 helicopters that were lifting off, including everything inside them. The informant had already run to the far side of the city, so I took out the tainted Holy Grail, fed it a name and a face, and put a corruption curse on him from 6 kilometers away. He turned in a bar on the east side. I watched it through his own eyes, which is a feature of the item I don't intend to use again, right up until the security detail on the door put him down, and then a panel opened that nobody in Za Kingdom has ever seen. Hidden quest complete. Eliminate the mastermind. You have been promoted from a regular player to a VIP player. There's one line of explanation attached to it. You will receive an initial identity in some dungeons. That's all it says. I have searched the forum in 3 countries. There is no thread about it, no guide, no rumor, nothing. As far as I can tell, I am the only person alive who has that line on their panel. I still don't fully know what it means, except that from that dungeon on, the game started putting me in rooms with a title already attached to my name. The reward list gave me 3, a biological modification pod, excellent genetic level modification of form, lifespan, physical capability, and disease. Completely useless on me, since I'd fallen off the top of its scale weeks earlier. I took it anyway, on the grounds that it might be useful on someone else. Remember that, it matters later. 12 combat pills, rare, 1 hour each, plus 50% perception, plus 100% reaction speed, plus 35% strength and agility, and total immunity to pain and fear. And the Thug War Blade, rare, plus 1% settlement experience per kill, stacking up to 30%. Then I went home and slept in a bed in a mansion, and the next dungeon took 3 months. 18 players, all around level 20, standing on a wooden dock in a port town that smelled like tar and fish. Objective: find Forbidden Fruit Island deep in the ocean and pick at least 1 forbidden fruit, and under that, for the first time, my new line, initial identity, Tycoon. 1 million Jinlin coins in an account in my name in a world I had been in for 9 seconds. That's what VIP means. The dungeon doesn't just drop you in anymore. It gives you a chair. One of the 18 read the objective, laughed, said, "You know what? I'm just going to live here," and walked off down the beach without looking back. I never saw him again in that town, and I want you to remember him, because he comes back. Nobody had heard of Forbidden Fruit Island, not one sailor in that port, not the harbor master, not the fishermen, not the drunks. So I bought the truth. Gold does in fantasy worlds exactly what it does everywhere else. I found an old boat builder with a bad leg and 30 years of stories, and paid him more than he'd earned that decade. And he told me 3 things. The island moves. At night, it glows, and it sits in the storm sea, where the waves come in higher than a ship's mast. And there are exactly 3 calm days a year. I bought a ship. Lin Hao came along, and so did his older brother Lin Yi, and both of them were violently seasick for the first 3 days in shifts around the clock. The crew found this funny. I found it funny. Lin Hao, gray-faced over a rail at 4 in the morning, informed me that he had gotten out of a wheelchair for this. I sat on a barrel eating small sour fruit and watched the horizon. Buying a ship, incidentally, is nothing like buying a car, and I learned that the expensive way. I walked into the harbor office with 1 million Jinlin coins and the confidence of a man who has never owned anything that floats, and within an hour I had been sold a beautiful 3-masted merchant vessel with a rotten keel by a very charming gentleman. The old boat builder with the bad leg found me admiring it that evening, hit the hull twice with his stick, listened to the sound it made, and asked me how much I had paid. Then he laughed for a long time in a way that made his cough come back. We bought a second ship together, the ugly one, 3 berths down, squat, wide, wrong-looking, with a hull like a bathtub and a mast that leaned. And he explained to me that in the storm sea, beautiful ships are for widows. Crew was harder than the ship. Nobody in Princess Port wanted to sail southwest, not for double wages, not for triple. I had 30 berths to fill, and for 2 days I filled 4, and the 4 were men no other captain would take. What finally worked was honesty, which surprised me as much as anyone. I stopped promising a safe route and started promising a specific number, paid half in advance, in gold, on the table, in the tavern, counted out in front of everyone. 16 men signed in one evening. 2 of them were bringing their sons, then 3 months. I want to say something about that, because most of my life since the empty box has been measured in minutes. 3 days in a zombie city cost me 20 minutes out here. 7 days in the wasteland cost me under an hour, and this one cost me 3 months of continuous, uninterrupted living. I learned to sleep with a hull moving under me. I learned every man's name on that ship and what he'd left behind. I cultivated every single night, sitting cross-legged in a cabin with the lamp swinging, and by the end of the 2nd month, I had gone up 2 full levels of the Great Dream Saber Sutra without fighting anything at all. Lin Hao filmed most of it for a video series whose comment section had by then entirely stopped calling him a liar. Lin Yi, the elder brother, turned out to be a better sailor than any of us. Nobody was more surprised than him. On day 4 of the second month, the horizon produced a warship, Great White Shark Pirate Gang, black sails, 3 decks of guns, coming in fast with the wind behind them. I froze their cannons from about a mile out. All of them mid-load, which meant that when the first gun crew tried to fire, the ship discovered the problem the loud way. Then they came alongside and threw grapnels and put out a boarding plank, and I walked onto it alone. The enemy count far exceeds 30, I remember thinking. Perfect for maxing out the buffs. 10 seconds. That's what 100 pirates comes to when the man on the plank is 10 times a human being and has been stacking berserk on the railing for the last 5 minutes. It wasn't a battle. It was a shift change. The 4 masters were another matter. They came out of the stern castle together, and they were good. A young man in a tuxedo who fought with a sword hidden in a flute. A one-eyed old man with twin scimitars who moved like water. A crocodile man, 2 meters of him, upright in steel plate. And the captain. They fought me to a genuine standstill for about 4 minutes, which nobody had managed since the dragons, and then the captain decided to end it and summoned his contracted beast. The great horned shark king came up out of the sea beside his own ship. It was the size of a hill, and when it leapt, it took the light out of the deck. I answered with Dream Blossom consecutive slash. Dozens of cutting planes at once, filling the air between me and it, and the shark king went into them at full speed. It came down as rain. The captain's mind broke on the spot. That's not a figure of speech. A contracted beast death goes back down the bond. He was on his knees making a sound that had no words in it before the last of it hit the water. I looked at the 3 still standing. I want you to be my dog. The tuxedo one agreed instantly, which is why I never trusted him. The one-eyed old man refused. Politely, he said he would serve, work, sail, fight, but he would not be anybody's dog, and he'd rather be killed on his own deck than answer to that word. And the crocodile man put his sword down, point first, into the boards and said the line I have thought about more than any other line in this story. We crocodile people respect the strong. If you are strong enough, we will follow you. But we also value individual dignity. Rather than living as a dog, I would prefer to die in battle at your excellency's hands. His name was Chen Guang. I took all 3 on his crew, dropped the word, and never used it again. We put into Princess Port for repairs and recruitment, and there I met the only honest official in that entire world. I did something I'm not going to dress up for you. He was a young Navy inspector. He came aboard to check our papers, found irregularities, and refused a bribe. Then he refused a bigger one. Then he explained with real patience that his father had been a harbor clerk and that the reason ships sink is paperwork nobody checked, and he ordered my ship impounded. I took him into the captain's cabin and killed him. Then I put on his face with the Mad Trent mask and walked into the harbor authority and filed my own entry papers, stamped them myself, and paid a colleague of his to cover his shifts for the next 2 weeks. I don't have a joke for that one. He was a good man doing his job, and he was in the way. I have thought about him more than I expected to. With his face and his access, I got into the Maritime Records Department, and there I bribed the archivist who took it, unlike his colleague, to find me one specific book. Lord Cedric's exploration record, 200 years old, water damaged, 4 pages of relevant text. Forbidden Fruit Island is not fixed in one place. It does not always float above the sea, and it is guarded by the sea god envoy, described in that record as a whale with many eyes. Meanwhile, the one-eyed old man took his advance pay and ran. He didn't run far. He got as far as a building on the edge of the harbor district with no windows and a door that was never locked, and inside it, a hooded figure that the locals called a shadow priest called him Child, and took his remaining eye and gave him something else to see with. He came back that night to kill me. I was sitting on the hotel roof with a jar of rice wine in the open deliberately because I'd known he'd left and I'd known what leaving meant. He came out of the dark faster than he had ever moved in his life. One strike. There was no body. In the morning, there was a scatter of gray dust on the tiles and a patch of shadow that didn't behave properly and faded by noon. I sat back down and finished the wine. I thought about a proud old man who wouldn't be called a dog and about the fact that he had walked into a church full of shadows within 4 hours of being offered a job with good pay. Some people can't take yes for an answer, and 2 days out of Princess Port, sailing for the storm sea, a beautiful woman in a light veil came surfing along beside my ship on a plank of driftwood and asked me a question in a voice like a bell. Human, where exactly do you come from? I have been asked that question twice now. The first time it was written on a bathroom mirror by an apartment building. The second time it was asked out loud, pleasantly, by something wearing a woman's shape and standing on a piece of driftwood in the open ocean. Then she pulled me into her domain. Deep blue, in every direction, no surface, no sky, and pressure like the bottom of the world. And she began, without hurrying, to go through my consciousness, not reading it, scouring it, sifting through everything I had ever been, looking for the answer to the question she'd asked out of politeness. I put the source of ice into her. It frosted her arm. Frosted. A power that had turned an entire mountain into a monument, put a thin white film on one forearm. She looked down at it with mild interest, the way you look at a mosquito. I hit her with the Thunder Dragon Blade at full extension, with flow state up and 30% penetration, and I cracked 2 scales. Then a hand came out of the blue, mountain-sized, casual, and it did not need to be fast because there was nowhere in that domain that was not inside it. I dodged perfectly 3 times with 105 agility, and every speed buff I own. It closed on me anyway, because in her world, the distance between 2 points was whatever she decided it was. I burned everything. Combat pill, immunity to pain, immunity to fear, double reaction, the sound system, all 3 charges one after another. Entering dream and break dream to get out of 2 closing fists. The magic dragon armor's flame shield, which lasted 11 seconds. The bioforce field until my stamina ran out and then past it. And I want to be precise about how badly this was going. My armor was failing. I was down to 1 working arm. I could taste copper every time I breathed. I have 4 spare lives on my finger. I remember thinking quite calmly that at the rate she was working through me, 4 was not a large number. And then, somewhere in the middle of it, I broke through. Not heroically, not because I dug deep. It happened the way breakthroughs actually happen. I had been cultivating the Great Dream Saber Sutra every night for weeks in a private universe behind my coats, and the meter had been full for 2 days, and the pressure of a god's hand closing on me was simply the last push. Great Dream Saber Sutra, level 4, which unlocked dream transformation of the universe. And what that does is take a domain, hers, and turn it inside out. The blue came apart. The pressure went. And she was standing in my world, on my ground, under my sky, with a saber-light horizon closing on her from every direction at once. "Welcome to my world," I said. "You had your fun messing with me in your territory for so long. Now it's my turn." I took her head off, and then the sky opened. I want to be careful describing this, because I only saw it for about 2 seconds, and I have never been able to decide how much of what I remember is real. There was a face above the ocean, enormous and blurred, the way something is blurred when your eyes refuse to focus on it as a survival measure. It had disheveled blue hair with storms turning inside it, and where the eyes should have been there was lightning, and it looked down at my ship. Every human being on my deck was simply gone, not struck, not thrown. The crew was there, and then the deck was empty and wet, and the whole thing took less time than a blink, and it did it by looking. Then something else arrived. I never saw it. I only felt it. A calm, unhurried, immeasurable pressure that came from nowhere in particular put itself between that face and my ship and pushed. And the face went back out of the world the way a hand goes back out of water, and then time ran backward on my deck. 12 men and a crocodile came back out of nothing, standing exactly where they had been standing, mid-sentence, with no memory of anything at all. Dungeon difficulty control lost. Initiating dungeon adjustment mechanism. Compensation for the affected player. 1 random item chest, excellent grade. 3 equipment repair scrolls. I sat down on my own ruined deck and read that twice. "They screwed me over almost to death," I said, to a crocodile man who had been dead 90 seconds earlier and didn't know it. "And the compensation is 1 excellent grade item." Chen Guang reasonably, "Is that bad?" The random item chest gave me a menu, which is what everything gives me. Stormcaller helmets, sea god weapons, 3 separate things that would have raised my numbers. I took none of them. I took the faceless statue instead. Excellent grade, and it is not a weapon. It is a faith carrier, a receiver. Set it up anywhere, and it collects the prayers of anyone who prays before it, and it transmits them to me across worlds. Because I had just spent 20 minutes at the absolute ceiling of everything I own. Divine blood and epic source power, 4 excellent artifacts, 100 plus in every column, and a thing had looked at my ship and unmade my entire crew without moving. More strength was not the answer, not that kind. Then Chen Guang asked me to come home with him. The crocodile people live in the storm sea itself, on rock islands that get hit by 15-meter water every day of the year. I want to be clear about how his people greeted him. They called him a traitor for wearing what they called the thin skin of weak humans, meaning steel plate, meaning armor, meaning anything he hadn't been born with, for living on rotten wood, meaning ships, for coming back with one of them. Their champion was called Shin Guoji, and when I challenged him, he refused, twice, on procedural grounds, in front of everyone. Then he found a way to accept that made his crowd laugh. Our duels have very grand rules. Close combat, in the water, without any magic. Underwater, no abilities, against a crocodile, in the sea, in his own tribe's home water. It is not a duel, it is a method of execution with an audience. Agreed, I said, before he finished enjoying himself. One addition, the loser obeys the winner completely. He took that deal so fast he nearly bit his own tongue. Now, here's the part that made the whole thing work. It happened months earlier, in a gray zone in the real world, on a day I have not mentioned once because it was completely unremarkable. I cleared a set of trash zones on my way home from a sale, and the total haul was one rare item. I complained about it at the time. The item was a sea god's protection ring. I put it in storage and forgot about it for 2 months. I put it on the morning of the duel. Here's why that ring mattered and why the duel was over before it started. A crocodile man in water is not a good swimmer. He is a different physical proposition entirely. He does not swim, he travels, and one motion of the tail, and he has crossed 8 meters. He can hold his position at any depth without effort. He can stay under for the better part of an hour. Against a human being with lungs, in the sea, the fight consists of waiting. The sea god's protection ring does one thing. It makes the ocean stop treating you as an intruder. You don't fight the water. You don't push against it, you breathe in it. I had picked it up out of a gray zone behind a laundromat in a suburb of Dongjiang on a day I described at the time as trash. Chen Guang did not know I had it. Nobody did. I hadn't known myself until I went through my storage the night before looking for anything at all that might keep me alive and found a rare grade ring at the bottom of a bag of unsorted junk with a description I had never bothered to read. We went in off the rocks, and Chen Guoji came at me the way a crocodile comes at anything in water, which is to say from below and behind and very fast. He never touched me. I was faster than him in water with no magic. A human being out swimming and out turning a crocodile man in his own sea in front of 200 of his relatives. I want you to understand that this was not close. I got behind him twice in the first 4 seconds, and the second time I put a knee into the back of his skull and he went limp and started to sink. I hauled him out and put him on the rocks face up so he'd breathe. 10 seconds. That was the whole duel. Then somebody else jumped in because of course they did. I fought challengers for the next 20 minutes, one after another, until they stopped coming. I didn't seriously injure a single one of them. That was deliberate, and it took considerably more effort than winning did. It is the reason the next part happened instead of a war. Eventually, the biggest one left standing came up out of the water, put his hands on his knees, and shouted at me between breaths, "Human, we have lost. You may dispose of us as you wish. We, the crocodile people, are not cowards who fear death." The chieftain came out to meet me after that. He was ancient. His scales had gone white all over, and he had to stop halfway through sentences to find the rest of them, and 2 of his sons had to help him down onto the rock. He asked me one question, which was whether I intended to harm his tribe. I said no, so he told me where Forbidden Fruit Island was. He'd known his whole life. His father had known. It's the sort of thing you don't tell outsiders because outsiders come back with ships, and he traded it in about 4 sentences for the safety of people who had just spent 20 minutes trying to drown me. Forbidden Fruit Island is green. That's the first thing. After 3 months of gray water and black storms, we came through the last wall of weather, and there was an island sitting in a ring of calm. Hills, forest, white sand, sunlight, with the storm going around it in a circle like traffic around a roundabout. And rising out of the water beside us was the sea god envoy, a whale, deep blue, longer than my ship, with 10 eyes along its flank, each one a different color, and every single one of them open and looking at me. I had my hand on the thunder dragon blade. "Congratulations," said the whale, trying. "You were successful, or the second group to find this place." I did not put the blade away, because I have learned things that they are currently in a bit of trouble. It added, "You had best go and help them." Then it sank back down and left me standing on a deck with my sword half drawn, feeling like a man who has kicked in a door and been offered tea. The trouble was inland, in a clearing, in front of a stone arch. The man standing there was the player who'd walked off down the beach on day 1, announcing he was going to live in this world forever. It turns out he hadn't been joking. It also turns out he was the second strongest player in that dungeon. He was a shapeshifter. He'd found the island days ahead of everyone. He'd arrived with 2 companions, and there were 2 bodies at the edge of the clearing under a tarp. He had spent every hour since then trying to get past the 2 things guarding the arch, elemental guardians, one water, one wind, both about 4 meters tall, both made of what they were named after. He'd tried it as a bird, shot down, as a silverback gorilla, thrown into the tree line, as a python, as a shark in the stream that runs past the arch, and in the end, in genuine desperation, as a fly, on the theory that they might not bother. They bothered. He was sitting on a rock with his head in his hands when I walked past him. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say, and I have found that walking past people without a word is dramatically more effective than any line I could have written. He tried to warn me. I'll give him that. He got up off the rock when he saw where I was going and said, Hey, they don't stop. They're not. The water guardian came at me first. I want to be fair to it. It was a genuinely well-designed obstacle. 4 meters of moving water in a roughly human shape, and every hit that goes into it goes through it and does nothing. It reforms from the stream behind it as fast as you can disperse it. A shapeshifter with the strength of a silverback gorilla had spent 4 days on that thing and had gotten precisely nowhere, and he was right to. I froze it. Absolute zero into a creature made of water is not a fight. It is a category error. It locked solid mid-stride with one arm out, and the stream it drew from locked with it for 30 meters upriver. I cut it in half at the waist and kept walking. The Wind Guardian was smarter, and it had watched what happened to its colleague. It went up. Then it went wide, spreading itself out until it was less a creature and more a region, 40 meters across, with no center to aim at and nothing solid to freeze. That's a good defense against a man with a sword. It's a very poor defense against two. I sent a dream self at it from the east, walking, unhurried, unkillable, and the Wind Guardian did what anything does when something it cannot hurt keeps coming. It concentrated to hit harder. And the moment it had a center again, I put the Thunder Dragon Blade's chain lightning through it from the west. It came apart in the air like a dandelion. Behind me, the shapeshifter said, quite clearly, "Holy," and then a word I'm not going to repeat. Beyond the arch was a single tree, and on it was a single fruit. I picked it. Then the shapeshifter came running up and reached past me, and his hand went through it. He tried 3 more times. So did his surviving friend. The fruit was there. It was solid. I was holding one exactly like it, and their fingers went through it like it was a projection. The Guardians weren't an obstacle. They were the till. You pay by beating them, and neither of those men ever had, and the tree does not extend credit. I gave them both a heavenly origin pill on the way out, which is worth considerably more than a fruit, and I told them to go home. Level 10. New skill, quick draw slash, and then the reward list, and it went to epic. Eye of the Sea God, epic grade. You may control an entire ocean at will as a true sea god overseeing his domain. Not water magic, not plus 100% to aquatic damage. The ocean. As a domain, the way a landlord controls a building. Second pick, the Ocean Messenger. Excellent. It summons storms, waves, and lightning on command. It commands all sea life within 10 kilometers. It has a 35% chance to simply shatter whatever it hits, regardless of what that thing is made of. Third, a multi-masted galleon, excellent with a soul of its own, 12 self-loading cannons with a range of 32 kilometers and total immunity to any storm in any sea. I had gone into that ocean on a botched ship with a seasick teenager and come out of it owning weather. Then came the housekeeping, which is the part of these stories nobody tells and which I think about more than the fights. I had 3 months of accumulated wealth in a world I was about to leave forever, and none of it crosses over. Gold in a dungeon is gold in a dungeon. When the timer ends, it evaporates with everything else, so I spent it. I gave Chen Guang the great white shark, the pirate warship, fully repaired, his in a sack of gold on top, and told him to take his people off the rocks if he wanted to. I paid every crewman by hand, personally, while they were still working the rigging, in coin, more than they'd signed for, and the remaining tens of thousands of Jinlin coins I put in a hole. I dug it myself, on Forbidden Fruit Island, and buried it there, on an island that moves, that sometimes isn't above the water at all, guarded by a 10-eyed whale that has let exactly 2 groups in. That is the single most secure vault in any world I have visited, and there is a small chance I will never see it again. I have made my peace with that. The last thing I did, in the final seconds before the dungeon closed, was eat the forbidden fruit, not earlier. It signed dates in the last 5 seconds, with invisible active and the bio force field at full and one hand already on the exit, because it is called the forbidden fruit. It grows on an island guarded by a god servant. I was not going to find out what the punishment for eating it was while I still had a forwarding address in that world. Storm power. Excellent. Every melee attack I land can spend it to spawn a tornado, controllable, up to 12 of them at once. Besides playing the role of the icebound emissary, I said to nobody as the world went white, I can also moonlight as the Gale Saber, 3 months in there, under an hour out here, and I never told the Chen brothers that they had died on that deck, or that something had put them back. The money problem, incidentally, solved itself about a week later, in the least dignified way possible. I had a flesh mountain in my pocket dimension producing monsters faster than I had uses for them, so I put 6 of them up for sale on the forum, leader grade 20 to 50 million each, which is well under what anything like that goes for. The forum called me a liar for 2 pages. I can stake my younger brother on it, wrote one poster. This OP is definitely showing off. Then I uploaded video. My private messages hit 999 plus and stopped counting, and in among them was one with a tag on it I'd never seen before. Official. The Bureau wanted all 6. The handover was at an abandoned state farm outside the city at dusk, and everyone involved was completely certain it was a trap. They were certain I was baiting them. I was certain they were baiting me. There were shooters in the farm buildings. I counted 11 through the walls before I landed, and Captain Fang himself was running security. Yes, that Captain Fang. I came in from above on a Pegasus in a black straw hat with a veil and sat down in the middle of a courtyard containing about 40 armed men. Nobody moved for a while. They'd brought the payment in gold bars in a crate, which is a very bureau thing to do. I lifted the entire crate one-handed to check the weight. I heard somebody at the back of the courtyard say something under their breath. Then I opened a floating stone gate in the air and let the monsters out one at a time, and Captain Fang's people learned what a bone demon looks like at close range. 300 million yuan. Afterward, Captain Fang came over. He is a very direct man, and I respect him. He did not ask about the monsters, or the gate, or my face. He asked about the horse. What dungeon? He said. Drops that. A fantasy-type dungeon, not very high level. I don't remember the specific name. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he offered me a position with the bureau. A real one, with a rank in it, the kind of offer that ends careers of the people who fail to secure it. No, I said, thank you. And I flew away from a man who had once stood over a dead werewolf and said even I couldn't have done that while he watched the sky where I'd been. 2 days after that, the guest elder token went warm in my pocket. That's the Wuji sect's version of a phone call. Chen Haoran's message was 4 lines long. They had located a demonic sect stronghold. 3 allied sects were marching with them. They moved in 3 days. He wanted me on the mountain when they did. I sent back 1 word, and then I went and did something else entirely because I had a problem that a war wasn't going to solve. I needed believers, not the 2 in my kitchen, not 30 monster types out of a flesh mountain, which I had tested and which produced nothing. Real ones, the kind that make that thin line of light run from a person's chest to mine. And there's exactly one way to get those. It is the way every faith in the history of every world has been built. You do not save one person and wait. You give people something to say out loud, and then you let them say it to each other. That's what I understood in principle. What I did in practice was considerably stupider, and it is the reason this part of my story ends the way it does. I tried 3 other things first, and all 3 of them failed in ways that were instructive and humiliating. Attempt 1. A market town, market day, in the guise of a wandering ascetic. I stood on a crate and spoke for 11 minutes about a benevolent celestial power watching over the common folk. I was good. I have watched a lot of people sell things in 2 worlds, and at the end of it, a fruit seller gave me a pear out of pity, and a monk from a local temple invited me to a doctrinal debate that I was not qualified to survive. Nobody prayed, not one thread of light. Attempt 2. A miracle in public. I froze a runaway cart in the middle of a street in front of about 60 people in broad daylight with the horses still in the traces. What happened next taught me more about human beings than anything in the previous 4 months. Within a minute, there were 11 separate explanations circulating in that crowd. Ice cultivator, wandering swordsman, a curse, a blessing from the local river god, a trick with salt. By the time I left, 2 men were arguing about whether it had even been cold. People do not become believers because they saw something. They become believers because somebody told them what it meant, and they were in a position where they needed it to mean that. Attempt 3, which I am least proud of, was money. I gave a great deal of silver to a poor family in a poor village and told them who to thank. They thanked me, sincerely, warmly, for about 4 days, and then the silver became the new normal, and the thread I could see between us thinned out to nothing, because gratitude for a thing that has already happened is not faith. Faith is about the next thing. So I took the Pegasus east over farmland, looking for somebody who did not have a next thing. And on a road above a river, I watched a woman walk off the bank into the water on purpose. She didn't hesitate, and she didn't look around first, which is how you can tell it wasn't a cry for help. She just walked out until the current took her. I put out ice chains and pulled her back onto the bank. She was maybe 20, thin in the way that means years, not weeks, and the whole left side of her face was scar tissue, old, badly healed, the kind you get from something that happened when you were small, and nobody had money for a physician. Her village had a man in it called Wang Dabao, and by local reckoning, Wang Dabao was the bottom of the barrel. She had been told repeatedly, publicly, as a fact about the world, that even Wang Dabao didn't want her. That's why she was in the river now. I was, at that moment, wearing the face of a white-bearded immortal because I had put the mask on before I flew in, and because I am nothing if not prepared. So I stood over her, dripping, glowing very slightly, and said the only thing I had come there to say. The Celestial Lord is called Benevolent Virtue, Celestial Lord. Pray to him. This is your only hope of salvation. I made that name up on the bank of that river. It took me about 5 seconds. I picked 2 words that sounded reassuring and put a title after them, the way you'd name a restaurant. She went down on her forehead in the mud and started kowtowing. She did not stop when I told her to. I had to put a hand on her shoulder to end it. Then I knocked her out, put her on the horse, and flew her 400 kilometers to a place where nobody knew her. Here is what the next 11 hours consisted of. I want you to have all of it, because I have noticed that when people tell stories about miracles, they leave out the logistics. I had a biological modification pod, excellent grade, genetic level repair, absolutely useless on me because I'd fallen off the top of its scale months earlier. It had been sitting in my storage since the City of Paradise, doing nothing at all. It needed power, a lot of power. So I went back to the real world to a rental yard outside Dongjiang and hired a 1,000 kilowatt diesel generator and paid for delivery to an address that does not exist and then moved it myself at night on a flying horse. Then it needed water, clean, and about 600 liters of it. I carried river water in buckets for an hour and a half. A man with 112 strength and an epic dragon source walking up and down a riverbank with 2 buckets because the pod's intake fitting did not match anything I owned. Then it ran for an hour, and I sat on a rock outside it and ate cold noodles. While that was going, I found the peak. I wanted a mountain that was bare, isolated, visible from a long way off, and effectively unclimbable. And after about 40 minutes of flying, I found one. A black spur of rock standing up out of a valley with sheer sides and nothing growing on it. I set the faceless statue into the stone near the summit, where it could be seen from the valley floor by anyone who looked up, and where nobody without wings would ever reach it. Then I went into her dream. I came in as the immortal, the beard, the light, the whole production, and I gave her the second half of the script. Hurry and embrace your new life. Remember, as long as you sincerely believe and spread Tianzun's honored name, more blessings will come. She woke up at dawn on a hillside 400 kilometers from home. She touched her own face, and the left side of it was smooth. She got down to the water at the bottom of the slope and looked at her reflection for a long time. Then she sat down in the mud and cried in a way I am not going to describe because I watched it from 300 meters up through a scope, and I have thought since that I should not have. And the faith arrived. I felt it, a line from her to me, and it was thicker than the ones running from Serafina and Isolde by an order of magnitude. It was warm. It was the first genuine unit of that resource I had ever collected. For about 11 hours, it worked exactly the way I had designed it. The next morning, her prayer reached me again, and it was not gratitude. Her village had found her. She had walked home. Of course she had walked home. She was 20 years old and had nowhere else on earth to go. And she had walked into her own village with a face that had been ruined the day before and was not ruined anymore. They put her in a cage. They called her a demoness. They sent for a shamaness from the next county who arrived and performed a diagnosis and confirmed it at length for a fee. And by the time I got there, they had stacked firewood around the cage in a ring and were arguing about which of them would light it. I want to lay out how long that took because it is the fastest anything has ever gone wrong for me. She was healed at dawn on day 1. She walked home over day 1 and the night after it, 400 kilometers on foot, which means she was walking when she wasn't sleeping. She reached her own village on the morning of day 3. She was in a cage by that afternoon, not because of a stranger, not because of an enemy. Her own neighbors looked at a face that had been ruined since childhood and was suddenly not. And the first explanation that occurred to anyone was demoness. And the second explanation that occurred to anyone was fire. The shamaness came from the next county and charged them for the diagnosis. She was thorough. She burned things and chanted and walked around the cage and produced a verdict that surprised nobody and that everybody had already paid for. The woman in the cage told them about the immortal on the riverbank. She told them the name I invented in 5 seconds out of 2 nice-sounding words, and she told it to them over and over, and every time she said it, it made everything worse, because a demoness who has been given a god's name by a glowing old man on a riverbank is not a woman with an explanation. She is a woman with a confession. I came into that village as a big man in plain clothes, because the immortal act had caused enough trouble already. I killed the shamaness first, in front of all of them, then 7 or 8 more, and about the time it takes to describe it, and the rest went over the walls and through the fields and out of the village entirely. It was over so quickly that the firewood was still stacked, and the woman in the cage, with her hands on the bars, watching me do it, with the smoke of her own execution not yet lit. This little girl, she said, only asks that the brave warrior no longer commit such slaughter. I stood there in the middle of an empty village. Not thank you, not save me. Please stop killing them. She'd known those people her whole life. They'd built the fire. She do. And the first thing out of her mouth, the very first thing, was to ask a stranger to spare the rest of them. I cut her cage open with 1 stroke and got back on the horse and left. That woman didn't help my abilities at all. I said in the air, out loud to nobody, if something happens to her again, I'll be too lazy to care. That was a lie, and it was a bad one, and the horse didn't dignify it with a response. Here's what I actually learned on that hillside, and it's the reason I'm telling you the whole embarrassing thing instead of the version where I look clever. I tried to buy a religion retail. I found one broken person, fixed her with an industrial appliance and 600 liters of river water, wrote her a name, and expected a faith to grow out of it. And what I got was one thread of light and one woman in a cage, because a faith is not something you give to somebody. A faith is something people say to each other when you are not in the room. I hadn't built anything. I'd done a favor in a costume, so the statue stays on that mountain where the valley can see it. And the name I invented in 5 seconds on a riverbank is now loose in a world with 2 moons, and there is exactly one person alive who knows it. She has every reason to say it out loud for the rest of her life. That's the seed. That's all it ever is. Let me tell you where I started. Flat on my back on a yellow wasteland with a hole in my chest and a blunt knife in my hand, listening to 2 strangers open my treasure chest, find nothing in it, say he's really pitiful, and walk away. The unluckiest player in the world, in the worst class in the game, with 1,000 yuan to his name and a dead couple's grudge he'd inherited along with the body. 4 months later, I sold 6 monsters to my own government for 300 million, turned down a job from the man who once said even I couldn't have done that, and flew home over a city I had frozen a piece of. I never did change class. I want to say that plainly because I bought 2 rings for a man I thought I'd become, and I was wrong about him. Everybody in this world will tell you the saber is cannon fodder. The forums say it. The bureau says it with a polite nod. My own first instinct was to get out as soon as I hit level 30. I put 500,000 yuan into a starter skill that every saber is issued for free and throws away, and that skill is the reason I can cultivate at all, and the reason 1,000 demonic cultivators didn't get past me on a mountainside, and the reason I'm still here. The class was never the problem. The problem was that nobody had ever been allowed to choose. I still have the empty box, incidentally, the actual one. It's on a shelf in a house that a grateful father gave me for a pill I didn't understand, next to a speaker named after a man called George. And in 3 days, I'm expected on a mountain in another world where 4 sects are marching on a demon stronghold, and a man in gold armor is counting on a guest elder he thinks is level 30. Somewhere under a rock with an air hole in it, a baron is eating bread I bring him and waiting for a patron who buys people by the 100,000. Somewhere in a valley in the east, a mountain that offered me immortality is dragging itself back together and remembering my face. And somewhere on a black spur of rock above a village that tried to burn a woman alive, there is a statue with no face on it, and every prayer said in front of it comes straight to me. She's down there right now, saying a name I made up. And the terrible part, the part I keep turning over at night, in a house with a door to another universe behind the coats, is that a girl in a forest once asked me whether praying really works. I told her that sincerity brings results, but whether it works depends on the person. I was lying to cover a menu. Turns out it depends on the person. It just wasn't the one either of us meant.